Age of Sigmar story phase. Grab your hammer so we can clear a path through chaos and forge our own narratives in the Age of Sigmar. Your allies through the subterranean hellscape this episode are...
I'm Paul, and hey guys, did you hear what the silent people said?
No.
Yeah, me neither.
It's not bad.
I'm Aaron, and get ready to hear jokes so bad that they will kill Davy and he will roll over in his beast grave.
Already happening.
And I'm Phil, down in my beast grave, never to leave, even in death.
Somber. All right. And I'm Davy, and I live, I die, and I live again. All right. So as you may have figured out by whichever intro you may have just heard, we are doing a crossover. This is What the Hex meets the Story Phase, two podcasts that exist on our Mortal Realms network. We're happy to be working together. At least that's what we tell the paparazzi when they come taking their pictures. It's a story we maintain. But we are here together to talk about something relevant to both podcasts. It is the Direchasm Anthology, like we mentioned. So we'll be doing this as the story phase episode, but we're going to cover some of the usual What the Hex things too. And to that point, we should say, for context, this is towards the end of the Direchasm season. We have all the releases out except for Arena Mortis 2, which we should be seeing before the 5th season arrives, and waiting on that to come slide into our DMs. I am going to keep this kind of brief because we have 11 short stories to cover, which is quite a hefty helping. In story phase terms, that might be a pretty light load, but we in the story phase, if we know anything, we know how to make those episodes long. So for our community shout outs, I just want to shout out our local community, which we haven't done for a while. And that hinges greatly around Vint, who runs the local Warhammer store in Fitchburg. He set up a great environment for us to run leagues and different things like that. And then obviously Phil and I, a special shout out to our Underworlds League. At the time of this recording, we are a couple days from the finale of our return to in-person gaming, however long that may last. Eyes on you, Delta. But the jazz ensemble, Skylar, Josh, Brian, all that crew that have been coming out and just giving that positive energy each night that we're playing. It's been really awesome. I find at the end of a couple hours playing, I've been smiling for 2.5 hours straight, and it's awesome. So nod to that part of our personal community. But our next segment to bang through here is the What the Hex is going on with you? And Aaron, since you are our host tonight, what the heck is going on with you? What have you been doing in the hobby lately?
I finished, for anybody who listens to the story phase, I've been talking about my Slanesh endeavors for a long time, but they are done. And so I have pulled, okay, let me clarify. By done, I mean assembled and in a box, never to be touched again. Instead, I have now pulled out what little Nurgle forces I have, and I have not taken knife to model quite yet, or clippers to sprue. But I've perused through the instructions, which in a way is its own little hobby. But I'm getting ready, psyching myself up to start tackling that little project. So I'm excited to be doing something different.
We'll do a little back and forth then. Phil, what have you been up to?
Yeah, unfortunately not much. Got out to play again though. That felt pretty good. Rolling some dice for the first time in a couple weeks. Yeah, and obviously reading, which is good.
Yeah, excellent. Paul, what the heck is going on with you?
I had finished my Salmon Ella miniature, so it's a Mortal Citizen. Shout out to our Mortal Realms Discord, coming up with this awesome non-combatant idea for the Mortal Realms. And she is a fisherwoman, so I finished her at the end of last month. And then I spent most of this week assembling the new Dominion / Extremist terrain that's coming out with the new AOS 3.0. And then assembling all the Stormcast from Dominion and Extremist as well. And then giving them to my children and then slapping paint on them in haphazard fashion. So it's been pretty fun to watch them like actually get to grips with the miniatures in the last couple of days. So I've enjoyed that immensely.
All right.
Awesome.
And for myself, I've been actually at the time of recording, we just launched the Hexodus blog. It's been fun to get some feedback on that. It had a soft launch a couple weeks ago, but I am new to the whole system, and so I used those couple weeks to kind of troubleshoot that whole thing. And Aaron helped me out from defeating myself with lack of tech savvy. And hopefully by the time this releases, the next entry will be imminently arriving.
You have earned the title webmaster of www.themortalrealms.com. Congratulations. It's the greatest title I can bestow on anyone.
Yeah, it is a great responsibility, and one for which I feel no obligation to uphold.
No one ever does.
Yeah, we're going to drive this straight into the ground. And then hobby-wise, I have some conversions that I'm excited to show off for Eyes of the Nine. They're not quite ready yet, but the color scheme's coming together. And if I can get my button gear, then they might make a showing at our finals, the finale of our league. So, but TBD, we'll see how it goes. Anyway, we got a lot to cover. So what do you say we get on with it?
Sounds like
Please
a plan.
Paul, would you do us the honors with your dulcet tones heading into the story phase?
The story phase. In the story phase, we delve into the stories, characters, creatures, and environments of the Nine Realms. Poisoned from the inside by the treacherous Cataphrane curse, the Mountain forever calls warriors to its bloody depths in its desperation. Myriad warbands answer from across the mortal realms, some seeking treasure, others power, and yet more wishing only to kill. None find what they came for, and even death is denied those who enter Beastgrave's halls.
How do you do that in one take so well? Man, good job.
I mean, like years and years of vocal training is what it comes down to. And knowing it takes forever if you mess it up.
As soon as he started reading, I was like, man, I typed this like while I was talking to you guys in the preamble. Like, what are the odds that I set him up for failure with like a egregious typo somewhere in here? So Aaron, you should also be praising me is what I'm trying to say.
We'll save that for the After Dark.
Oh, okay. So we usually kick this off with the spoiler-free segment. And so this is where we kind of talk about the book, what to expect, and give you an idea of what we thought of the book without giving anything away. So if you are of a mind, you can choose to go out and snap it up yourself and read it as well. That's not to say you couldn't. If you're somebody who's totally fine with spoilers, obviously you could listen to the whole thing and still read it. So we like to go with a when. When does this story take place in relation to other background, other lore that we know about, and what big picture events inform the plot? Anyone got a sense of this?
Yeah, this is post Necroquake. So the Necroquake sort of causes the city of Shadespire, which is where the Underworld setting originated, to spill out into Gur. And so in so doing, we ended up inside this mountain called Beastgrave. And Direchasm is just a like deeper segment of Beastgrave. So it's like journeying deeper down into the mountain.
Mm-hmm. I would also point out that this is after the Black Library novel or novella, I don't remember, for Beastgrave.
Did you read that, Paul?
I did, yeah. That was actually where I was confused as to whether or not I had read this book, because I was like, I remember reading about Beastgrave. So, yeah, no, I actually did read that one, which I actually enjoyed quite a bit.
Right. That's a C.L. Werner, as I recall.
Correct. Yeah. So that was a cool little Underworld specific novel that is definitely an intro into what's going on here with the Direchasm Anthology. You don't need to read it, but it was a fun little intro into what we're dealing with here.
Generally, one of my favorite things about like Underworlds is that it is sort of a chronological like series of like games, right? Like one leads into the other, and so like in that sense, this follows from like the I don't know if the word is events, but like the settings in which each of the previous seasons like took place, which I always think is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's some like loose story elements to sort of give a reason for all the warbands to be there, but it's like a 1-card text, so it's like 2 paragraphs. So,
Yeah.
At this rate, that's all I have time to read. So, like, I
Fair.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, it is worth noting, like every warband has their motivation to be there, and
Yeah.
I enjoy that. And I enjoy even the cards kind of build some story on it. Phil already kind of touched on this with the where. We're in Beastgrave, which is a mountain. It is a mountain. It is the Mountain. We see that prefix often with stuff in Age of Sigmar. You like the grub or the Mountain or whatever the case may be. Yeah, it kind of means like the primal, like the essence of, I think is what they're trying to, like the super duper, right? So Beastgrave is somewhere in Gur. Have we seen a map in any of the other fiction as to where it specifically is?
It is. It is on a map, like the not the quintessential, maybe quintessential map that they've been showing sort of as part of the sort of AOS 3.0 stuff, right? How a lot of it's set in the realm of beasts. Those maps do have Beastgrave. It's like, I don't know, on the left side of it, the west side.
It's not on the continent of Thondia. It's across.
There we go.
Sea.
You anticipated my question. Our main point of reference in Gur thus far has been Thondia, and specifically the city of Excelsis. So not all that close, sounds like.
And not related to the mountain that Kragnos was buried under, which I thought was a missed opportunity.
Yeah. That
seems like maybe they were setting that up, but yeah, nope.
What do we know about Beastgrave already? That's kind of like a central who to this. If you want to consider the Beastgrave as a near, it talks about it being somewhat sentient, but sentient not in the way that we think of it. And you kind of get some, I don't know, like elder god vibes from this thing. Like this is a thing that exists in a way that we can't quite comprehend. Does anyone want to try describing what Beastgrave is itself, like what the mountain is itself?
Yeah, I would say that it's almost like a embodied force of nature. It's not conscious in the sense that it doesn't have like a mind that can, plan and have conscious thought.
Can't
but
play
it
a game of Parcheesi with it or anything.
Yeah,
right?
but it has drives and primal desires to try and sate its hunger. They always talk about how it's hungry and it's always trying to eat, which, since it's part of Gur, kind of makes sense. Literally everything in Gur is trying to eat each other, including the continents. So it only makes sense that a mountain would be doing the same thing.
We talk about the qualities that this Beastgrave mountain has, and it seems as if that would be sort of a unique or solely some quintessential. I don't want to use quintessential again, but it's unique to Beastgrave, but that's not true. In fact, most mountains, if I understand correctly, in Gur are hungry and are moving around and consuming other mountains in some sort of slow grinding way, and so. In that regard, Beastgrave is actually pretty similar to a lot of this stuff, but I think it maybe is a more ancient, more primal, maybe, how do I say the word, progenitor of some of these mountains. And so because of that, it has a particular, it's given particular reverence and like wide berths as well, that people know that this particular mountain is particularly dangerous.
Yeah.
I think without getting into spoilers, I don't think it's unfair to say that the mountain is some kind of sentience. And one of the things that you understand from playing Underworlds is that there also is an ancient civilization within the mountain called the Silent People. And there is not any necessarily direct correlation between the mountain itself and the Silent People, but it is possible to conjecture that the Silent People may have awakened the mountain or instilled an awareness into the mountain itself. They seem to be something that's a little bit intrinsically involved with each other. So that's, I guess, if we're going to talk about who, it seems like an interesting part of who Beastgrave is.
Sure. There's a more obvious who, and that is the many factions that are represented in this. somebody want to quick give us a rundown of which factions we actually have a point of view from? Because this is relevant to somebody who might have a favorite faction and might be wondering, hey, can I hear about my favorite dudes and dudettes running through Beastgrave?
I mean, I'll rattle them off if you want me to.
Do it.
Here we go. If you are a fan of a warband as follows, nope, because I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce all these right. Miari's Purifiers, the Dread Pageant, Morgwaith's Blade Coven, Spiteclaw's Swarm, the Grimwatch, the Eyes of the Nine, Rippa's Snarlfangs, Morgoth's Crushes, Hrothgorn's Mantrappers, Thundrick's Profiteers, the Wormspat that is, and there's actually a couple others like sprinkled and peppered in that we don't necessarily get their point of view, but believe me, they're there. So if any of those intrigue you and you want to read more, then this is the anthology for you.
For those keeping track, that is all of the Beastgrave warbands except for the starter box, the starter Direchasm warbands, and then a handful from the previous seasons. So, which makes sense because this book dropped right at the start of Direchasm, and you can't go spoiling the other Direchasm warbands in this book. So I think that it tells us why there's a little more Beastgrave warband flavor than you might have expected based on the name on the front of the book. Our last W question that we hit here in the pre-spoiler is what are there any additional what that we've missed above? And what I want to hit on here is what do we already know? And if you want to know more about what came before, what happened in Shadespire, you can go back and listen to our coverage of Josh Reynolds' The Mirrored City.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yep. It's around the 34, 35, 36 area of our podcast. I don't.
How do you know that?
I think I had to look it up for something. I've plugged the story phase a couple times on What the Hex, and so I remember it was 30 something.
Cool.
And that talks about that. But the city itself, Shadespire, was created. The Cataphrines. It was a city that was very wealthy and a trade hub and a cultural beacon. And those in charge, the Cataphrines, were looking for ways to basically outlast death. How can we not die? Because we're accomplishing everything else. Like, wouldn't it be cool to not die? And
I guess
they're getting pretty close to that. And Nagash doesn't take kindly to that sort of thing. So he curses the city, curses them to, you want to live forever? You got it, but you're not going to get it the way you want it. And so
wants to live forever.
So what the heck, listeners? This is a thing that happens in the story phase. People just start singing sometimes. So they're supposed to owe $1 when they do so. So Paul has a really substantial debt, which we're going to make him come clean on at some point. But that curse then went on to anybody who entered the city, and the city being that trade hub, cultural beacon, like we were talking about, is very attractive to treasure seekers and the like they're coming. So they get trapped in the city, and they would die and come back to life. And time is all wobbly there, so you can come back to life before you actually died in the first place. It's a lot of possibilities that go on. Then Nagash in the background had his Shaishin Nadir. He basically he had a big thing called the Necroquake. It was a ritual that didn't quite go right and blasted death magic all over, and that cracked Shadespire, which created a possibility for people to escape, which is a big deal. Unfortunately, they escaped right into Beastgrave, which is a real bummer for them. And the curse of the Cataphrines followed them there. And that is a lot of what's going on in Direchasm, the details of that. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so. Pretty sure that gets everybody caught up to speed if they're not already aware of what's been going on in Underworlds.
Before we get any further, does this so we do know, again, spoilers for anyone who hasn't listened to the rest of the story phase episodes up to now, but Nagash ran into some technical difficulties recently. One wonders, is that, so that's not represented here in this novel. And you wonder if that's going to carry on into whatever the next season of Warhammer Underworlds is. But that's an important part of the win as far as this goes.
Totally.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
Not that it happening twice now consists of a pattern, but the fact that the first 2 seasons were Shadespire centric and the next 2 seasons were Beastgrave, you wonder if that is a pattern, and then that is indicative that maybe we'll go somewhere next, somewhere different.
What realm is next is the question.
I mean,
so that's all speculation.
Yeah.
You can hear that in our fantastic speculation sode, which is for sure going to be something everyone wants to hear. I don't know. We if we run out of ideas, I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But I would say this is the part where Aaron would usually say, let's stop being coy and get into spoilers. But before we do, let's give a sneak peek on what we thought of the book. So initial recommendations. Do we recommend the book? I'm going to run down the line. Let's start with Paul. Do you recommend this book?
I do. I enjoyed it.
And to whom do you recommend it?
I would recommend it to people who like Underworlds, but also just people who want kind of... the fun thing about this book is because it's about the Underworlds warbands. Aaron can talk more about that you have a very clear idea of who you're dealing with. And that was a really fun thing about this set of short stories. But in general, I really like short stories. They're a little bit of investment of time and a lot of payoff if you're interested in the characters. So I like that.
All right. Well, how about Aaron? Give us your hot take.
Speak of the devil. All right, hot take. I loved it, actually, and it makes me wonder what I've been missing out by not reading anthologies more regularly. What I particularly loved about it is the fact that all the stories were about like a given subject. So in that regard, it actually read very like it had a very clean like through line, and that made it all the more unput downable. That's a phrase I just made up. Real page turner in that regard. Paul was right. I'd mentioned it while I was reading it to the group that I really vibe with the idea that like these are all special characters in the setting that like I know, and I can look up their models, and I had to do that a lot because I don't know everyone's names like Davy does all the time. I don't know where he stores all that information, and so because of that, it really, I don't know if grounded is the word, undergrounded perhaps, because we're on a mountain, but like it made it all the more interesting that I had like this direct attachment to it. And I guess I never really knew how much that mattered to me until I read this book. And then furthermore, we always talk about how the short story form is the best form for like this black library stories, and I feel like this is no exception. Most, if not all of them, were fairly concise. They like focused on like one coherent thought or one like idea that they wanted to get it across. They did so, and then they exited gracefully. And because of that, I really appreciated it. So it might have been because maybe some of the more recent books I've read have been long and maybe meandering. It was a nice, fresh breath of fresh air to read these short stories, and it was nice to get the variety that we saw in the book as well. So I'm rambling. The point is I really enjoyed it. I think it's obviously great for those who read Underworlds and who have even a passing interest of the background for that game, but I think it stands up as one of the better Age of Sigmar groupings of stories, like just period, regardless of the particular subject matter. So
excellent. Phil, counterpoint.
Well, counterpoint. I do feel like there's something here for everyone. I do think that there are going to be some of the stories that maybe are not. You don't have to read it all the way through, like start to finish, I guess. Like if you really love all the Underworlds warbands and you really want to dive into like psychology of some of the fighters, learn some of their backstory, get some of their motivations, like that can be really, really nice to have that sort of low level, sort of dirty feeling of like, these are real people and this is the situation they're stuck in and these are their motivations, which is really cool because I feel like we don't always see that in the Age of Sigmar. But I also feel like there were some stories where it felt almost forced. And I just felt like, I guess I'm just not as invested in this particular person's story. And so I would say if you really like Age of Sigmar stories just generally, there's definitely a lot to read here for you. And if you're really just focused on like one particular warband, grab that story, read about them.
Well, my take is very similar. Recommend it if you like the war bands. I enjoyed it for that specific thing. Is I have play a lot of Underworlds, try to play a lot of war bands, and it was fun to get the perspective. Some more than others. If you are not somebody who plays Underworlds, though, like where else are you going to get a point of view from an ogre trapper or a Tzeentch warband, or there's a lot of perspectives that are just not out there. And then my other recommendation is somebody who's looking for some new authors. Like we have not a ton of different Age of Sigmar authors right now, like that are active. And there's a lot of new names here. And on this podcast, we don't really listen to or read much in the vein of 40K. So I don't know if some of these authors are dabbling 40K. It does. If I'd done any research whatsoever, I would have read the stuff in the back that says what else they've written.
But some of them, yeah, some of them are 40K, like what would have been exclusively 40K authors, but not all of them.
But the point being that there's a lot of names here that are new, completely new or relatively new to AOS, and that's kind of fun, kind of refreshing, and we may see more from them. So this might be your first look at somebody who might be writing more AOS in the future. We'll find out. That's got it. Shall we?
I did have one final thought, actually, based on.
Shall we detour to Paul's side note?
If you're looking for tight narratives where you're introduced to a character and you stick with that character throughout the whole story, this is a really good book to read for that. If you don't like wandering, going to different perspectives, etc., right? Like all of these stories were super tight and focused on the actual protagonist, excuse me. So that was kind of a refreshing difference for Warhammer stories. So I like that, and that was unique to me.
Fair. Spoilers. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
All right. There are 11 stories here. We are going to give a brief summary of each, and then share some thoughts on those, and then we'll give a overall wrap up. But we're not going to do a blow by blow. Some because that may not be totally interesting. Some because I read this over quite a stretch, and so I'm not going to remember the blow by blow for each of these. So
try and stop me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This is where Aaron really gets into his own. So
we open on a scene of.
I know you're not going to do that because I'm looking at the same notes you are, and that's what you go off of. Are we? There's no way you're doing this straight off the dome. I challenge you.
No, of course not.
Yeah. All right. So our first story is The Mountain's Call by Graham Lion. And this story is the longest in the book, I do believe, by page count. If not, it's tied. It's very close. And this is there's several points of view. There is a human survivor from Gur, and Miari's purifiers who are arriving in Gur. So we're seeing them before they've even made it inside Beastgrave. And then we also get the point of view of the Dread Pageant, who have been there for a while, and they're already aware of how it works. They already know that you can live and die and live again. And it is their central conflict it's covering. So the Miaris are being brought there by a vision sent to them by Teclis. And the Dread Pageant are there attempting to torment the mountain itself, which is a real boss move. They know that the mountain is hungering for death, and right now it's even worse because the Cataphrane curse has arrived, and so rather than the mountain Beastgrave has always lured people to itself with promises of whatever they desire most, and they get in there and get trapped and die, and it feeds off of that. Now because they die but then are born again right away, it doesn't actually get to feed off, so it's being tormented. It's having this hunger that can't be sated. And the Dread Pageant, that's not enough. They're going to torture people until they're almost dead, and so keep the mountain really really upset. So if you want to torture a mountain, I guess you better be a Hedonite of Slaanesh. And it's about that conflict. Anyone else got something to add on the overall summary of that?
Well, I think this short story, is definitely the intro short story. We start outside of Beastgrave, we're introduced to the two main war bands in the box set for Beastgrave. The human survivor was kind of an interesting twist because the human survivor was not a part of any warband that I'm aware of, and provided a lot of the narrative thrust going forward. It was interesting to me that it talked about the confidence and the faith that the purifiers had in their mission, and how they were a very kind of disparate force. It focused a lot on the different actual models that were in it and what their beliefs were. So I enjoyed that aspect of this story a lot because it seemed to really allow each individual to be a character and to have their own motivation, including the human survivor. So that was kind of cool. And the narrative thrust of getting into the mountain and introducing you to the mountain itself of Beastgrave and figuring out what it's all about. I did enjoy that for sure.
Yeah. Definitely agree with everything Paul said. This almost feels like a story they should have included with the Direchasm box, because it's almost like this is the perfect setting to understand these two new war bands and like get you on the ground understanding what's going on with the narrative. So I feel like it's perfect for Direchasm to have this story. And I do think that the point you made about how it sort of introduces you to the mountain and sort of how it works is super important, because it lays the groundwork for understanding like how is it that the game sort of fits into the story. And it's like you have this constantly shifting mountain, and like literally it reshapes itself constantly, and like it sort of forces all these different groups into different parts of the mountain and further down to try and eat them. And by doing that, funneling them all together, it's creating conflict all the time. And so that's basically where the game happens. It's that you get these forces coming together, and that's sort of the interesting conflict points in Direchasm.
Sure.
I agree with everything that's been said, so I won't add too much on that. But I like that they need to come up with creative ways for reasons for the warbands to be here. And there's few warbands that have as creative and interesting sort of purpose as the Dread Pageant does in terms of their goal of, actually torturing the mountain, as Davy was talking about. And so it's great to see. It's one thing to hear that or like see it written in a little warband description in the rules somewhere, but to actually sort of see it played out, to see like what they think about that mission and sort of have it expanded upon is both my favorite part of this story and my favorite parts of the stories to come, as well as just to sort of see that expansion of their motivations. And so this was, as others have said, is a great way to start because it's a unique, weird sort of purpose. And that really sets the stage for this and other stories.
Yeah, and like we said, we're getting both perspectives. We're getting the perspective of a warband that is not yet aware of the death and rebirth, and a warband that is well aware of it. And so you get to see like both sides of that, which is kind of cool. Like the growing horror of what exactly is going on, and those who have found a way to. I mean, the Dread Pageant really dig it. It's cool for them. So that's a pretty good summary of that. Does anybody have anything else they wanted to hit before we move on to the next story?
So, yes, I really like the addition of the human survivor here. Her whole tribe was slaughtered, and she's on this kind of idea of revenge, but she also ends up in Beastgrave. She's the only character that gets a ton of time in this story who's not a model that we know of. And
doesn't even get a name.
And ends up in Beastgrave. So what happens to this human survivor? I'm super intrigued to find out if we're going to hear what happens to this person.
They die, but the question is, do they get reborn? Right? Like they die without their name, but they don't. They entered the mountain along with this elf warband, but whoever this is, they aren't reborn with the warband. So not quite clear exactly what the rules for rebirth are with the Cataphrane curse.
Yep.
TBD. But yeah. That's it. So next story was Last Rite of the Hag Queen by Dale Lucas. in this one, the overall summary is Morgwaith of the Blade Coven. They are the Sisters of Cain, Daughters of Cain warband. We kind of jump in media res. They are fighting Slanesh followers, and then as they describe them more thoroughly, you realize this is not the Dread Pageant. These are I don't want to say generic, but generic Slanesh hedonites.
How dare you?
And we figure out that they're here. They're on a mission from God, from specifically their demigod, their almost god. At the time of this writing, I don't think Morathi had ascended to become Morathi Cain.
Mm-hmm.
So
Correct.
they're looking for a shard of Cain here. She sent them here, but then the central conflict is, why were they sent here? Were they sent here as like, you're my favored ones, we need you to accomplish this mission? Or are they sent here because Morgwaith expressed some doubts, however subtle, at some point, and the cascading effects of that? And Morgwaith deals with that herself, where she's dealing with a potential mutiny. Once you get stuck down in a ever-changing hellish pit, and the first place they get to, the first temple they get to, is already looted, after she's totally sure, yeah, it's here, we're about to be triumphant. Just kidding, all we got is some cobwebs and dust. And so there's a lot of actually daughter versus daughter, daughter of Cain versus daughter of Cain combat in this, conflict and combat. And it's them overcoming that and proceeding on, and how they go about solving that and moving on to regain their confidence and attempt more questing. What are people's thoughts about this? Have I missed anything, or what did you get out of this?
I thought this was an interesting kind of dissection of faith, and it brings up a theme that we continue to see in a couple other short stories, where that as Morgwaith has her inner dialogue, it starts to be interjected with these other thoughts that she doesn't necessarily assign to herself or with her confidence. And there's a lot of that in this story, where she's like, not sure if she's supposed to be here or exactly what's going on. And then another theme that keeps getting brought up is that she's keeps being directed to these places and has this feeling that, like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be, exactly what I'm looking for. And then it turns out to be something that leaves her hungry. And that seems to be a theme of the stories, is that the mountain itself is hungry, and it makes the characters themselves hungry, but it fails to fulfill them all the time, right? Which seems to be a bit of a metaphor for Beastgrave itself. It is a hungry mountain that seeks to consume those that come within, and yet fails to consume them, at least completely, right? And they are reborn again. So I thought that was very interesting. It also deals with a lot of things that we kind of come into more closely when we're talking about the Broken Realms, where we talk about Kire, who is the Scytheborn, the Snake Lady, versus Morgwaith, who is a Hag Queen, and the difference in the faith between the Scytheborn and the Hag is an interesting point of plot difference, which I enjoyed.
Phil, you got any takes on this?
Well, I really enjoyed seeing some of the like doubts that these, like, you sort of think of these warbands as being like very sure of themselves. They know, like, they're in this place, but they're like super skillful, and you just sort of, at least I've always sort of assumed that they're sort of like maybe the pinnacle of their kind of, unit from larger Age of Sigmar universe. And in this case, that maybe there's some shadows of doubt on that, and maybe they are just sort of regular chumps, and they just happened to show up in this place, which I thought was interesting. And then just this sort of look at how the society for the Daughters of Cain probably works, because of the internal conflicts that happen just within these five. And you can kind of extrapolate from the discussions about how Morathi sort of she bestows this honor on this person who has been talking about her, supposedly secretly, to sort of say, hey, maybe Marathi is, maybe she's not the end all be all. And then it's like, I have this great gift for you. You get to go and like explore this mountain, and it's going to be wonderful for you. But is it really? Like, is she really just stabbing her in the back and getting rid of her because she's been bad mouthing her? And it sort of gives you this sense that their society is a little bit backstabby, and
sure, or a lot of it
or maybe all of it. Maybe all of it is,
Yeah. And it's a not fun, but it's an interesting conflict that she's feeling, where she's like, if Marathi knew that I had doubts, then yeah, this is probably like a wild goose chase and I'm being punished. But if she didn't know, then maybe this is legit. Or maybe if she wasn't sure, and so like all that, and then Beastgrave is all about those doubts and torment and all that sort of thing. So that feeds into that as well. For me, I like Daughters of Cain. That's actually an army book I have never actually read. I'm not much of a Marathi fan, and so this is like, as exposed to their background as I've gotten in a while, and so it's interesting for that. Even though like it's not my favorite faction. Sorry, Chuck Moore, if you're listening. But yeah, so for that, I enjoyed it, even if it wasn't a faction that I would instantly think like this is something I want to learn more about. Aaron, any thoughts, or should we move on to the next?
To build off of what Phil was saying in terms of the Marathi relationship, I think this is a unique sort of relationship that we don't necessarily get between characters and, I'll say, their gods, or in this case, their demigods. Sometimes you get characters wondering, well, am I doing what my god wants me to do? Am I interpreting their desires or needs? Or sometimes they wonder, is my god even listening? Are they even paying attention? Am I doing the right thing? It's rare that you get my god hates me and wants me to die relationship. But when you're dealing with the Daughters of Cain, that's apparently what we have on our hands. I tend to believe that that's the situation that they're finding themselves in. And then the second thing I'll bring up is that I think the author, it was Dale Lucas, right? Yeah. Did a pretty admirable job in terms of differentiating each of the warband members. I tend to think of the Daughters of Cain as relatively monolithic, and by no means are they, stark contrast to each other, but at the very least, he instilled some sort of personality on most of them, such that I understood and could recognize that this person's different than this. One's particularly young and hot-headed, and the Snake Lady is, she's mistrustful and maybe a little, sabotagey, so to speak. So in doing so, I think it helped them stand out to me, whereas before I didn't know a lot of their individual backgrounds. So good job, Dale Lucas.
Yeah, I think he did a really good job of characterizing the models into the characters. That is a good job.
All right. The next story up was The Gnawblade by Denny Flowers. And it is tough to see the name Denny without thinking of The Room, but we'll leave that there.
You're tearing me apart.
The plot of this, we're following Spikeclaw's swarm, and it starts out at the end of a battle with, I think they're fighting Despoilers, some beastmen.
Yeah.
Despoilers have the unfortunate role of doing the same thing they do in AOS, which is be the opponents a number of times. If not the whipping boys, at least the faceless enemies that get got. But the result of this fight is that Spikeclaw ends up, or Scritch, I should say, ends up with a Warpstone amulet. That's a thing he wanted out of this fight, and he gets it. And then he starts having visions. And it's funny because he gets it and he's like, yeah, I really want this. But there's a good chance I'm going to end up crushing it down for Warpstone snuff at some point. Like,
yeah. As you do.
Yeah. This is a warband that knows about the life-death cycle. Like he's aware of it. But this vision leads him to commune with a vermin lord in the Great Horned Rats domain, which is a very terrifying thing for any Skaven to be part of. But he gets basically assigned a mission, and is to find the titular Gnawblade, which is a blade that was forged with a combination of Sigmarite and Warpstone, if I remember correctly. And it was thrown down or no, the problem was it was like so powerful, it ended up accidentally cutting through reality and coming to rest here, like carved its way, and then somehow ended up in Beastgrave. And this Verminlord says, look, like, and for those who are not aware, the Skaven have a long history of hating on Nagash. And the Verminlord is saying, hey, look, you can get this sword and you can start causing some final deaths, like deaths that actually matter here instead of the die and reborn. That's how powerful this sword is. And guess what, Scritch? It's your lucky day. You got picked to go get it. And definitely there's no downside to this. And don't worry about that and go get it. And so the rest of...
Don't they explicitly tell him he's uniquely qualified to go get it because he himself can't die? And so, like...
Yeah,
exactly.
Or am I jumping ahead? But
no, that's true. So he goes, and then the final conflict is he gets to fight with some Farstriders. I think they're not named, but you can recognize them. There's a Star Falcon, and there's what's the Chamber Rangers? They're
the Vanguard.
Vanguard Stormcast. He even gets his hand on the blade right before his hand is cut off, and the blade cuts its way down through and is lost again. It's a little more dramatic than that, but that he does wake back up. And this is an interesting thing, that the warband itself, it's a 5-fighter warband, but 3 of them are there are always more. They're kind of generics, and so this is actually a warband that's much bigger than the 5, which. Once I remembered that piece of it, I was like, oh, right, like Hungering Skaven and Lurking Skaven, those are archetypes. They're not an actual, character. And so for me, I'll jump to what I found interesting. It was interesting to see a warband that knew about the life and death cycle from a race that is notorious for being short-lived, for backstabbing and assassination, and to see how that dynamic plays out when all of a sudden, like, final death is not actually in play, and that's to the side. That's the warband itself. And then the flip of that is they're going after this blade, and Paul, I'm sure you picked up on this. This it's really felt like the fell blade from the world that was.
Yep.
As a ultimate tool for messing up Nagash's plans. So those are my takeaways from this that I particularly enjoyed.
Well, and you have to wonder, like, I definitely had feelings of, is the Gnaw blade, right, which is the thing that fell into the warp, the thing that this Verminlord used to get Skaven into the pyramid to mess up with Nagash, right? Like, that feels a lot like what this story felt like to me. The other thing I really appreciate about this story is that because they knew that everybody was going to die, it very much seemed like this setting was tailor-made for Skaven and for Scritch to not care about killing all their underlings constantly. Like, it was more of just like, well, of course all the underlings are going to die because they're supposed to die. But then them coming back is like, oh, I am destined for greatness. I have infinite Skaven to sacrifice for my will. So I thought that was super fun.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, like, this, even knowing that, the Skaven nature still comes through, and they're still very craven, and they don't really want to die, and, like, he has to, like, force them to go into fighting even though they can't really die forever.
Yeah.
And he still doesn't want to put himself into any danger. Like, he's obviously more skilled than the rest of them, but he's always, like, standing at the back, like, get them. Why aren't you, like, doing stuff better?
Well, and it says the place of honor at the back.
Yeah, you always lead from the back, obviously. I feel like this gave a really great, just sort of profile of Skaven. And we get to see them a couple more times in the other stories, and it sort of all tracks. It's how they're all functioning, and they're just this constant nuisance in Beastgrave.
Yeah, I did enjoy the Scritch versus his second in command kind of dynamic of, oh, he's gonna betray me eventually. That was a fun little thing too.
I mean, yeah, it's like right there. It does what it says on the tin. He's Kirk the almost trusted.
Yep.
Like.
I like that they gave Kirk a little bit of personality too, though, that he was in some ways
Sure.
a little bit of like a simpleton kind of, and that's part of why he's almost trusted, is because he may not necessarily have the brains to do anything about it.
Yep.
When you guys are talking about like sort of the Skaven way, is part of like, combat and how they comport themselves in fighting others. I also thought it was interesting to get the insight as to like when they were by themselves and like how he would sacrifice a Skaven to feed the other Skaven because they were so hungry, and so like you just pick the weakest one out of you,
Yeah.
feed them to everybody.
Yeah.
Of course, it doesn't satiate him, but like that Skaven's going to come back eventually, and sort of that dynamic of the tenuous hold he had over his swarm, I guess you'd say. And like, I mean, and as we know towards the end, where he was losing control because of the defeat that they faced. Like that was a new perspective. Like, what does it mean if you can't scare your followers into following you because they know they can't die? Like that has to be a temporary, tenuous position to find yourself in. So that was to see that interestingly played out. Was I think the highlight of this story for me. And then the other thing I bring up is that warp or the Gnawblade, is that an item in the game?
No,
it is not. There is I was trying to decide if it could be like was it the Hero Slayer? Was that the sword from the first?
But there's Hero Slayer. There's also the Curse Blade.
Yeah,
which maybe it could be something like that.
But none of those quite match up with how crazy powerful. Yeah, I guess the Curse Blade feels closer here.
The thing I'll say is, stories like this are often fun when you get a whole bunch of like Easter eggs for like the game, and so the people who know the game can point out, well, that's really cool because I know this from this or that from the game. And so because that kind of a missed opportunity that they didn't include an item that like players would know, because I feel like they would do a better job to like really pull them in. But next time.
That's a fair point. It was cool to see the effects, this ever-present hunger, which has become more pronounced in the Direchasm season, how it affects Skaven, a race which are cursed with this like black hunger, which in itself is a card that you can put on hungering Skaven. That's something that they've dealing with that existed in the world that was, right, Paul?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So amplifying what already is a feature of these guys to start with, and how it hits them. So, and then I think the other thing it kind of mentions here when this builds in some other stories is, even the people who know that they could live again, like dying still sucks. And the accumulation of many deaths, it can really kind of wear on you, like it does, dying lots of times is a real drag.
Yeah.
So all the memories of the agony of that moment of death are pretty rough unless you're built in a particular way, aka Dread Pageant. So, any other thoughts, or on to the next?
I guess just that this story, I think, probably has the first like really sort of dark moment, and it's the one Aaron mentioned where he's like, oh yeah, that's the weak one. Okay, everybody eat him. And then, don't worry about stuff. And like, I feel like some of these stories had more of that than others. And there were honestly parts where I was like, okay, I get it. We can probably not like go into all the details. So, I don't know. It was interesting that they like had that balance where sometimes they went really dark for the horror aspect. And then other times it was like, people get it. We don't need to do the blow by blow.
I mean, it's different authors what they choose to emphasize. So that's kind of the fun thing with this. I definitely got that vibe in some of the other stories. I didn't. This one didn't hit me in the way that it seems to have hit you there, but some other ones, like I really got the horror vibe strong in some others. Speaking of horror vibe, Claws of Famine, anyone?
Oh man,
by Miles A. Drake. So this, I almost want to talk. Aaron, I'm coming to you first after the summary, because, but this, we start out with a noble woman named Valric. Maybe not literally noble, but she's real hungry. This woman, she's been trying to pursue a Bray shaman as part of this small hunting party. Their fortress held out against this awful siege, but the beastmen, kind of had really turned the screws to them on this siege, and now they're out, trying to get a little revenge, trying to redeem the terrible ordeal that their city went through. For anyone who's played it already knows that Valrique is a member of the Grimwatch. They know that she's a gnarly looking ghoul. That's not how she's described. And again, we know this about the Grimwatch. They have this delusion that they are not, in fact, awful, cannibalistic, naked savages. They see themselves as like, noble knights and such. And so the central part of this story is that these reflections, which is something that we saw a lot in Shadespire, it was all the shade glass. We see that to a different extent with the amber. There's all this amber that's either solidified or molten. We see that all through here, and so you can again and again, the rooms are talked about as being lit with this eerie yellow light. And so Valrique is having flashbacks, having nightmares, and losing track of what's real and what's not. And as Valrique encounters more and more trauma, becomes hungrier and hungrier. The idea that she's not actually part of this noble hunting band and may in fact be a ghoul herself starts to fray her mind, and it culminates in her, kind of having to almost decide, like, am I giving in to the delusion? Would I rather be deluded or not? And I found this really fun. I don't know who had some thoughts about this one here.
I really enjoyed this one because it really, this is definitely a horror story, right? This is a psychological horror story to me. The story starts out very medieval royalty, like everybody is just this fantastic individual, and then Valrique eventually gets separated from her party, and it just becomes this isolated fear running from everything. And at some point she even runs from her own warband because the amber shows her what they really are, instead of who it is that she thinks that they are, right? And she only thinks that they are these noble people because she has consumed the blood of the Lord. That's the lore for Flesh Eater Courts. You share in the delusion of the general of the army, as it were, right? But it slowly is revealed in flashbacks and in waking dreams that her tribe was actually conquered by the Flesh Eater Courts, and she held out but eventually gave in to consume from this general who has sent her and this hunting party into Beastgrave to finally take revenge on this mage, this beastman mage that has fled into it. And the last scene before she really understands what's going on, she just keeps having these flashbacks of hanging on a wall and watching this terrible carnal feast before her, and then realizes that this was reality, and then is rescued, etc., and eventually has to basically decide that it was a dream and this is reality, because otherwise I'm crazy, right? It was like a serious, dark and fantastically written point of view that it delivered on all the promise that the Flesh Eater Courts battle tome had, and in a very short amount of time too. I was immensely impressed. And as you pointed out, the amber really starts to serve as a really interesting vehicle to belie the intent of the characters or to become an agent of the mountain itself. So that was a really cool turning point for me in this anthology.
So I've already established that I don't know anybody's names, and so when I first started reading this, and it was this, human huntsmaster, I think some of the other stories they'd already shown characters that weren't in the game, and so maybe I was dumb for believing this, but I thought, all right, well, this is just like a Cities of Sigmar, like free guild group.
Oh,
Up
awesome.
until like a page or two in, until, and I had told you guys while I was reading
amazing.
it, they said something about until they said something about noble king, and like that is like a trigger word for Age of Sigmar, and that like whenever a noble king is mentioned, you immediately think Flesh Eater Courts, and like so like the light bulb went off. I turned the page, and then it makes it very clear that that's what's going on. And then I had to Google Valreath Underworlds. I'm like, oh dang it, yeah, okay.
You Googled in the middle of the story. Oh, you never Google in the middle of the story.
Yeah, I read on my phone, so like so Google's right there. So, but like that, I had to set it down. I had to like lean back in my chair and just think about like, book, you got me, you tricked me. Good job. One of the. Well, that was one of the highlights of the anthology for me. I think this is maybe the first story that I've ever read from the perspective of a Flesh Eater court, and maybe it's the only one that exists, which that seems surprising. There's got to be others. I just haven't read them.
There's a horror anthology. I definitely remember reading one from their perspective.
There's a short story in White Dwarf as well. It inserts some of the plot into Broken Realms Techless that is from the Flesh Eater courts as well, and that was a really fun one too.
Well, from here on out, I think all stories should be told from the perspective of the Flesh Eater courts, because this one was such a fun read, and it makes so much sense. Like the way it was put together, it really convinced you as to how and why a Flesh Eater might think that they are something else. Like there was a very clear one-to-one comparison to everything that they were saying. And like one of my favorites was the fact that she continuously considered the bats, like the harriers, as hawks. And like you'd hear an echo down the hall, and she's like, it sounded like a bat shriek, but that it must have been some other creature or something down there, not realizing that it was what she thought were the hawks flying down the tunnels. So that like kept coming up. And it was a delight. I just loved sort of seeing what she thought she saw versus what I knew to be true for each of these characters. So that was neat.
I want to return to some of that, but we haven't heard from Phil yet. Phil, you got any takes on this?
It was, I think, by far and away my favorite story in this anthology. And it like getting... I've always liked the idea of how they have this grand delusion that they're, great knights and they are serving for their lords, and it's always fun to think about how like, they have no sense of being these strange cannibalistic vampires. But to actually like see the psychological shift as she starves and like starts to like have the magic of the delusion fade, and like trying to figure out what's real and what's not, and like trying to decide like, is my memory of what I think is real, or is what I'm seeing real? And like, it was just so good to see this constant struggle. And they don't really address it, but I kind of wonder, like, is this a thing that can always happen and it just doesn't because there's usually enough food that they don't like get so hungry that this happens? Or is this just a one-off thing that Valerie has to deal with? And either way, I think it's compelling.
Yeah, I think there was actually some kind of background where they have to continually feed or continually drink the blood in order to continue the delusion. But that may have been my own headcanon. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I know she's very driven by hunger, and it's hard to say, what things are generated by Beastgrave being Beastgrave and what things are the effect of being a ghoul. It's all like examples of some of the stories out. Like they defeat, they fight the Ungors a few times. They actually fight the Despoilers more than once in this. And when she's in her delusion, she's like, "Oh, like thank God they had rations on themselves. They have some of their pillaged ration bags." And you're like, oh man, I know she's just like looking at their juicy thighs or something.
Yep.
So,
get me some goat leg.
Yeah. Here, some of the things I want to touch on is I've noticed, some of this with this delusion. There's like these, parallels with the Matrix, and I guess whatever 25-year-old spoilers here, but there's what's Cypher, Joe Pantoliano's character, where he's talking about like, when I'm there, I can taste that steak. Like does it matter if that medium rare steak is real or not? Like, I can taste it. Like, it's, if you're in this position where you're like, well, I can either deal with reality where I'm like, realize I'm a horrible cannibal, or I can like give into the delusion where I'm actually like noble and doing good things and people care for me. Like, that's a pretty tough choice. Or maybe it's not a tough choice, that's, like, maybe you just say like, okay, like, it's just better to go with the delusion. And then on that same note, like, when she's in that delusion, they really seem to care for each other. Like, the Duke is like genuinely benevolent to her. Like, that some of the others are like, I don't think she's going to make it. Let's move on. He's like, no, like, she can feed for me, like, it was cool. And, some of the best cards in Underworlds are the ones that are translations of something that a ghoul is saying, like, blah, 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 translation, Halt finds her, do you not admire my beautiful cape, or whatever the case may be, so
well, like, the thing I really appreciate about this story is that it was such a wonderful dark parallel to the story of a Stormcast, where at the last moment of defeat they are taken and brought to absolute victory, right? And they have to deal with the reforging. And this story is at the last minute of defeat, they give in, and they must deal with that over and over through death and death and death. And I thought that was a really well done parallel between the two. The only negative I have about this story is that now I really, really, really just want a Cities of Sigmar warband for Underworlds that looks as amazing as they described in this story, because that like sounds absolutely fantastic.
Well, I think you're not alone in wanting a Cities of Sigmar warband. I think we found a general favorite so far. I went back and found the message I sent you guys as a reading. I said, this fourth is my first real page turner. So I enjoyed stuff before this. This is the first one where I was like, I got to get back and keep going on this. But we all agree we like it. Any last thoughts, or should we can keep on moving?
A final thought that I have is, I think for most of this story, I understood how she was able to delude herself into like thinking that she was a normal person. They had ration bags and the bats were hawks, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact that she didn't bat an eye at the fact that her lord was going to let her drink his blood from his arm, and then didn't seem to bother her at all. Is that something they normally, is that a regular, do most dukes do that? Is that a regular thing?
You mean you don't drink your duke's blood on a regular basis?
No, and I guess, okay. Well, I suppose that's my own shortcoming, and I need to grow past that, I guess.
You need to get a better duke, my man.
Yeah, I suppose.
All right. We'll go from that to another one I quite liked. The Chains of Fate, and this is by Nicholas Wolfe. This one's from Eyes of the Nine perspective. There you go, Phil. Shout out to Adam F. and Eric, who I know are big Eyes proponents. And you would think that you'd have a point of view from Vortimus being the boss man, but we don't. We have a point of view from Kacharik, which was really unexpected, but really cool. Kacharik here is giving us his take because so he's been bound to Vortimus. Kacharik, I guess I should mention for people who don't know, is a Zangor, and there's a card in the game. And Aaron, this is your little shout out. There's a card here. Nobody takes this upgrade, but it is eidetic memory, which means photographic memory, like everything you see, you remember. And somebody looked, this Nicholas Wolfe looked at that card and said, all right, I can do something with this.
Thank you, Nicholas.
So he explores this idea of like, what if you were in this eternal cycle of death and rebirth and you remembered it all? And that is Kacharik. And so it's amazing because like Vortimus will give some speech and he's, being all like, children, you should know that we are blessed by Zinch. And Kacharik is sitting in the back thinking like, I've heard this speech 46 times. Like exactly 46 times has he delivered this same speech. Kacharik has died 649 times. He says, I've been sacrificed. Vortimus has sacrificed me 649 times, which given a typical Eyes of the Nine win rate, that sounds about right?
Yep.
Like, this one gets a little gnarly right away. They encounter a Kurnothi. I don't remember which one it is. It might be Shiak, whatever it is. It's a Carnathy, and they don't recognize what it is. I think they're relatively newly arrived from Shadespire at this point. They've just gotten to Beastgrave and like, what are you? Well, we'll kill you, explode you, and then read your entrails, which they do.
Slow motion explode him.
yeah, like he's frozen in time as he's hanging in the air. So it's like reading the chicken guts, but it's a sentient being. It's pretty rough.
Yeah.
And this follows their move through Beastgrave and Kacharik, being real fed up with Vortimus and trying to figure out like, when can I break free of this servitude? And he has some vision, which is it doesn't quite reveal what it's going to be, but the vision we come to learn is like his chance to maybe kill Vortimus and be free. And now that they're not in Shadespire, he might be able to actually kill Vortimus, like for real. Turash and Narvia, the two Kyric acolytes of the warband, they've also seen something, and for them it is a chance to return to Shadespire. Unfortunately for them, they end up like disappearing. They're found later like in the amber. Like, it's bummer for them. Even worse for them is it turns out that they're like going through constant, like they come back to life in the amber. Oops, I'm in amber. I can't breathe, and so then I'm frozen in here, and so then I die, and so they're going through
dark.
Rough,
really.
And Vortimus is like,
and nothing can carve through the amber. Like you can't get them out. It's more just like until the mountain decides that you're released.
To his credit, Kacharik is like, shouldn't we do something? And Vortimus is like, they chose to cling to the past. They wanted to go back to Shadespire. Forward is the way. Pretty rough stuff. Kacharik sees his moment. I do not remember who they're attacked by. They're attacked by somebody. Arrows are coming in.
Carnathi again.
Carnathi, that's right.
They'll be hunted.
Yeah. So the Carnathi are coming in. The Carnathi have figured out like what we need to do is go straight after Vortimus. Like he's the real deal. And the Blue Horror gets to make a really brief arrival here. And then Kacharik is like, okay, like this is my chance. I'm gonna instead of protecting Vortimus, and he's taking arrows, like he's getting ready to get smoked himself, and he's like, instead of chopping down one of these elves, I'm gonna swing at Vortimus's head. And I know him so well. I've seen him so many times. He's definitely going to dodge left, and he's going to dodge right in the way of one of these arrows. And we're not in Shadespire anymore, and he's going to die. And right as he's about to do it, Vortimus instead dodges right, looks straight at Kacharik, smiles, and gets his head cut off. And you're like, Kacharik is like, what? He's like, whoa, he's dead. I'm finally free. He's like, actually, and he turns around like, well, now I got to fight this whole warband myself, but I've been through worse. I can do this. And it turns out he can't. And he wakes up. And he has been reborn. The curse has followed them. And Vortimus apparently knew it all along. And Kacharik is like, well, where are we going? And Vortimus says, to the Direchasm. So that is the more detailed summary than any other one. You can tell I enjoyed this. I had an eidetic memory of this story. Not really. But liked it. What do you guys have for thoughts? I kind of dominated that one. I was excited about that one.
Was this the only story that actually referenced Direchasm as like a thing?
It's the only one that I think specifically did. I think there were a couple other that talked about like descending further. There may have been one other that talked about like getting down into the Direchasm region.
Just
this
real
is the only
quick,
one where somebody was like motivated to do so. Aaron, what's up?
Can someone give me like the one sentence summary? What is the Direchasm? I feel like we didn't talk about that at the beginning.
I don't think there is like a solid definition. I think it's just like the deeper recesses of Beastgrave.
Is it like silent people specific, or is it again a generic location?
So specifically, like as you get deeper, you're getting into the silent people areas.
Okay.
I think so. Their presence is more apparent in the Direchasm.
Okay, cool. That's all I had.
Yeah. So as someone who really enjoys the Eyes of the Nine, at first, because of the perspective that we get from Kacharik, I was a little surprised because I thought that Vortimus was going to be a very different kind of character than he was. Like he almost felt dumb. Like the way he was being very like braggadocious and just being like, everything's gonna be fine because I've seen, like, I know everything. Trust me, guys. Like, I know exactly what's gonna happen, and we're gonna be fine, and it's gonna be great, and we're doing everything that Zinch wants us to do. And Kacharik's just like, man, this guy is such an idiot. I've seen him do this so many times, and it never works out. And I'm so sick of all of this. I've just been like shackled to this guy, and he's just like the worst. But then at the end we kind of find out that, well, maybe Kacharik doesn't actually know as much as he thinks he knows.
Yeah.
And that just Vortimus is just like Zinch, really, in a way, is like too
totally
focused
yeah.
on the future to like really be successful in the present. He's like, no, it's like, I know what's gonna happen, it's gonna be fine. But like when he says that, he means like 100 steps ahead. And so they just get smoked constantly.
So Vortimus is like a gaunt summoner, right?
A magister.
No, he's
okay.
It talks about him being in service to a gaunt summoner.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a
All
magister.
Right, that makes more sense to me. But with the Zangor, right? If he's an enlightened, the Zangar enlightened can see the future, right? And the Zangar Changebringers, the ones on the disc, can see the past.
Yeah.
I don't
think he's either of those.
I think he's just a regular Zangor, and they talk about in the story how all of the like gifts that he has were things that Vortimus specifically gave him for being in his service, but it also bound Kacharik to Vortimus.
Okay. Because it would be cool if he also used the Age of Sigmar rules for seeing in the future for the Zangar, as well as the Underworlds rules of the eidetic memory to define the character. That's all. That was my thought.
Sure. That would have been cool.
Yeah.
For sure.
This is,
for some reason they didn't go that path.
Yeah. This is the most, I don't know, I would probably say literate of the stories. It seems very well spoken from beginning to end because it's all from Kacharik's point of view. And with his eidetic memory, it really presents a very interesting perspective on what's going on in Shadespire and then Beastgrave, which I thought was kind of fun.
I liked it because it introduces a unique relationship, like intra warband relationships that are unique to this warband, play out interestingly, and like sort of lend itself to be sort of interesting situations. Like at one point towards the end, when Kacharik is fighting off, the Kurnothi, and Vortimus calls him over, and Kacharik thinks to himself, he's like, yeah, I mean, I'm literally dying over here, but like. Anything to protect this guy's life, right? Like, I mean,
I'm dying over here.
It was. I loved that sort of snarky, I don't know, attitude that he had, and I think that's also one of my favorite stories because of it. And then to say nothing of the fact that I also loved the antagonists, which were the Kurnothi warband, and seeing them in action, sort of literarily, really made me wish. Spoiler alert! That we could have gotten their perspective elsewhere, in one of these stories. And that to me, it's kind of a shame that we didn't. But
I mean, I wish we got their perspective from an Age of Sigmar army. Right?
Well, yeah, there's that too. Right? Yeah, but like because of that, I feel like they probably have a very unique perspective, and I hope that one day we'll get it, right? So whether here or elsewhere, I would have liked to have seen it.
Paul, talk to me about Beastgrave real quick.
Yeah, you should read Beastgrave because there's a lot of Kurnothi in Beastgrave. It's they are one of the two main tribes that we're talking about in the novel.
There's a short story that was released about the same time. If you want a smaller taste, and I do. Okay, I cannot remember what that one is called.
Yeah,
we'll try and find that. But that's another Kurnothi point of view.
Yeah, I will say that this portrayal of the Kurnothi felt a little bit more noble than the portrayal in Beastgrave. The one in Beastgrave felt a little bit more feral to me, if that makes sense. So
Sure.
if that affects your decision, but yeah, no,
The
they're
warden
definitely
in the
focal.
mountain is probably what you're talking about.
That's it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna read that. In fact, I'll see you guys later.
All right.
Peace
Been
out.
good talking
Aaron,
to you.
Aaron's been quiet for a while. Thank goodness. All right. Next up was Rage of the Mountain by Danny Ware. And this is from Ripa's Snarlfang's perspective, which is fun. When we were talking about at the start, getting perspectives that you're not going to get from other AOS fiction. Basically, the only place that this kind of gets, help me out, Paul, not Gloomspite. These are...
These would be what was in Warhammer Fantasy the common gets.
there
The
was something for him when Age of Sigmar just started. Anyway,
they had Grom the Paunch and the Wolf Riders, and they had the chariots and stuff like that. So like, they were definitely their own faction, but they were given their own Chronicles rules. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
But this Ripa, Stabbit, and Menai are here. They're trying to get this Lapa. And Ripa's had a vision of this big boss Lapa, and that is straight off their background card, the card that comes with the warband. That's what's brought them to Beastgrave. He's had this vision of this Lapa that's going to make him the boss of all bosses and be able to ride roughshod all over Gur. And in awesome Gits fashion, like they saw some Fire Slayers walking, and like, oh, they got a pouch. It's big enough. That pouch is big enough. It could have a Lapa in it. I bet you that's it. I bet you that's my Lapa, and I bet you I'm going to get that Lapa. And so they're trying to set up traps. It opens with Mina and Stabbit are having to dig a hole, try and set up a pit trap. And Stabbit is like, there's no way this is going to work. This is going to fill with amber. He's having to dig this stupid hole at the bottom of this, this cavern, and it's just going to fill with amber. And he's like, boss, like this, are you sure you want it here? And Ripa's like, shut up and keep digging. And as soon as they get done digging, it starts filling up with amber. And Ripa's like, damn, all right, let's work on something else. So they go set up a rock fall. And on this one, they have a stick, like a bone staff that's kind of fused together. Like, oh, this is going to be perfect. We can lever these rocks. It's going to drop right on these stupid stunt or they call them stumpies, I think.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
They're like, this is going to be great. And they're all set up. And then all of a sudden, all the rocks come tumbling down. And Ripa's like, what the hell? And Stabbit's like, well, I had to test it to make sure it would work. Well, of course. Okay. Great. And so then they go up and set up an elaborate trap on a bridge, which is going to be Ripa is acting like the bait. Like he's going to try and enrage these slayers, draw them onto the bridge. Mina is going to lob arrows at them from the far side of the bridge, and then Stabbit's going to sneak in behind them so they can't retreat. And then they'll be stuck on the bridge, and they can get them, and they can steal that sweet Lapa off of them. And most of the rest of the story is that conflict. And one of the slayers goes super berserk, which Ripa recognizes as this kind of hunger, like he's been feeling irritable and almost gives into this rage and hunger, and he recognizes it as being from the mountain. And the slayer that has the Lapa eventually like plunges over the side, and they're like, man, we lost it. But then I can't remember if it's Stabbit or Mina, but one of them is like, well, people come back to life here. He's like, yeah. He's like, we come back to life with our stuff, right? Yeah. Well, what if he comes back to life with a Lapa? And like, great point. You could still get the Lapa. And they're like, good enough for us. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
It was short and to the point and pretty enjoyable for me. What did other people think?
I definitely agreed. It's fun to see like the dynamic of Ripa trying to be like the cunning boss, and then he's just got these two just idiots that he's got to constantly cover up for and deal with.
But they're all idiots, right? Because,
exactly.
Stabbit is like, this is going to fill up with amber, and Ripa's like, I'm the boss, and it does, so like it's a real Three Stooges situation.
Yeah, which I actually love that they're like the Three Stooges with these dire wolves and
Three Stooges on Wolfpack.
Yeah. And like their plans weren't even like bad; they just didn't work. So I don't know, like it was just fun and light. I appreciated that it was sort of right in the middle. and it gave you a little bit of a break from some of the dark, like, because it's kind of a dark setting, and then some of the stories get pretty heavy, and it's like, yeah, this is just a nice light gets being comic relief.
Yeah. I mean, we just came off of Narvia and Turash dying, 12 times an hour
forever.
for eternity. Like it's pretty rough. So it was nice to lighten it up a little. For one takeaway for me was this. We obviously don't see them yet. Hopefully, maybe we'll see them in the bigger thing. But this actually had like a pretty cool relationship with their snarlfangs, their wolves, their dire wolves, where like they seem to like each other. Like the snarlfangs were looking out for them, the wolves were looking out for them, and like they were like, it felt like almost a 6-fighter warband, right? And as everyone knows who plays this warband, like the real power is those single dice wolf bites that always hit. So it was cool to see the wolves actually having a role in this as well.
The other thing was, I really enjoyed how the tactics for this warband seemed to come farther than the board game allowed, right? There was a lot of like, I'm going to send out one of them to go tempt everybody back into this trap, right? Which was it was a fun thing for me. I also really enjoyed how he just let them be malicious, evil little children, right? Like, and that was the fun part, is they're just a bunch of malicious, evil children, and anything that provides a motivation works, right? So that was a very enjoyable part of the story for me.
Any other thoughts on The Rage of the Mountain?
I'll just so I can say I chimed in. I agree with most of what everybody said. It was a silly story, and because of that, I really did enjoy it. It was silly, but also still fairly violent too. So it was like a silly violence. So there was that juxtaposition there. But all in all, I did enjoy it, and I think it was well placed in the book, like Phil was saying.
Yeah.
There's definitely a scale of violence in these kinds of stories, because like it's Warhammer, everything's violent, but like there's a difference between slow motion exploding bodies and like chopping people up with arrows. So
sure. We keep it in the Greenskin family here with the next one is Jabberslythe's Grin by Ben Counter, an established Black Library author. This is Iron Jaw Brutes rolling into Beastgrave to claim a prize. They're fighting a Jabberslythe, which is a monster we haven't heard about in a while. From as far as I know. But it's specifically Morgok, and Thug and Ardskull and a bunch of other dudes, which is, if you know the warbands, does not totally track, because they're a 3-fighter warband, but there's all these other guys hanging out. This is one of those examples where it's a warband, unlike the Eyes of the Nine, which are well established from Shadespire and have died and reborn a bunch of times. This is one of those that is just entering. This is the perspective of a warband just entering Beastgrave. And they are looking to take down a big beast and carry it back out and show that they're the biggest and toughest around. Very Greenskin kind of story. And they do get this Jabberslythe, and then they have trouble getting out. And honestly, I don't remember a ton about this. There's some Iron Jaw versus Iron Jaw fighting. They get tempted. They see one of the giant. They are tempted by a vision of one of the cities of the Silent People. And one of the actually Thug is like, I've heard about these are the Silent People. I'm like, what is going on?
How do you know?
I was like, how do you know about that? Also, your name is Thug with 2 G's. I did not expect you to be like the bright one, but that's definitely how this story paints him. Is he's like, oh yeah, like Thug's the smart one. I had a couple moments I enjoyed, but anyone want to add anything more to the story? Like they kind of keep descending until they lose their warband, and then there's a rebirth where it's just the 3 that we know, and they kind of resolve to like, we're gonna fight Beastgrave. But
it was that they were climbing back out, right? So they'd killed the Jabberslythe and they were trying to get back out of the mountain,
right?
And then they get ambushed by Skaven. And that's what ends the story. And I felt like it had a very nice, like, poetic ending where, like, when he dies, he sees the Jabberslythe with that grin, and it's looking at him.
Sure.
So it's like, oh, did you really did you really have a victory over the Jabberslythe in the end? But yeah, I don't know. This one felt, I agree, it felt a little forgettable. Like I like the characterization of the greenskins, but it was a lot of just like they went to a place and then they fought stuff and then they like kept moving to go to a new place.
Yeah.
And then there was some internal conflict and then they kept going.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was the story that I made it the farthest into the story before I realized exactly which warband it was. I don't know the names by heart. So I was like, okay, obviously it's an orc warband, but we had 3 of them.
Yeah.
Right? Like by this point. And so I was like, which one of the 3 is it? And it was until I was like, oh, it hit the breastplate. I'm like, okay, so they're Iron Jaws. Got it. Right? Like, so it was okay. I think this story suffered from being placed in between the 2 stories that were on either side of it. And
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
That's also one of my criticisms of the way that this was laid out, is that we have 3 destruction warbands in a row. And I think that was a poor choice to put all 3 of them together.
Point.
Because I really liked the Rage of the Mountain. The Jabberslythe Grin, I think I would have liked more if it was not placed between that and Heart of the Beast.
Yeah.
I think that would have been
we're going to
better
come back to this
served.
whole sequencing thing, but yeah, carry on.
So that was pretty much my only thought about it, is that I think the placement made it suffer a little bit from how high the story was before it to moving to this one, and then again the story after it was a lot more punchy.
Aaron, any chimes to
one of the things that made it suffer for me is because the antagonists weren't particularly like anchored in what I know about Underworlds or Beastgrave or what have you, is that it was kind of nameless, faceless Skaven. So it wasn't Scritch's swarm or Spikeclaw swarm. And like the Jabberslythe, although is something we don't see all that regularly, because of that, I don't have a particular like attachment to it being defeated in any real way. And so there's like, it kind of, it's 0 for 2 on sort of having adversaries that I care about in the context of this particular story. It was well written enough, and like someone said, the characterization of the orcs was spot on and on point. But the fact that it didn't feel like it needed to be a Beastgrave story at all, I think knocked it off a few pegs for me. Oh, and furthermore, the fact that it was like a whole Auric like fist as opposed to just like the 3 that we know also sort of removed it from the setting. So I think I find some of my favorite stories in this anthology are the ones that like adhere closer to the setting of the game as we know it. And this one diverged, more than most. And I think, in my opinion, it suffered for it.
Sure. I think one moment I did particularly enjoy here is Ardskull decides to challenge for leadership of the warband. And Morgok is actually kind of injured a little bit, but he's not going to let on, and there's no other way to do it. He's got to prove might is right, and he chops him straight in the forehead with one of these choppers. And it's like, Ardskull had the name Ardskull for a reason, and it's not that he had like a metal plate in his head. It's just that like the blade like lodges in his skull and then like sticks there and doesn't get through. And he's like, cool. Now I have your sword in my head, and I'm going to just keep doing my thing.
That was pretty. I
was like, whoa, rough stuff. So that was I like that depiction of Auric resilience, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely good, and like you could tell he'd done that before because he knew to like shake his head to disarm his opponent.
Yeah, exactly. This is my trick: get chopped right in the head, and then joke's on you. It's my strong spot. Yep. Any other thoughts on Jabberslythe's Grin? Hearing none, we'll go on to Heart of the Beast by Gary Kloster. Heart of the Beast is from the perspective of Hrothgorn and his man-trappers. And by his man-trappers, I mean some Noblars and Thrafnir. The, what is it? Is it Frost Saber? Is that right?
Yep,
Frost Saber.
Yeah. They're hunting something. They're hunting a beast, and this is described, with this black and red pelt, and maybe it's like got 6 legs, and it's kind of like some snake cat thing.
I
don't like it.
I assumed it was a basilisk, which was an old Forge World model.
That could be. I don't have any. Did you ever read the ElfQuest comics?
No, I read some of them.
Listeners,
but like,
so we call this a 2%er, right? Like 2% of the audience is going to pick up on this. So there was a monster in that called Mad Coil, and that's what I pictured. But it's he's on this hunt, and he was part of, and I can't remember the names of the ogre things, an Alfrastun or something like that. Yep. And he's pretty low on the totem pole there, but he's like, if I can catch this, impressive beast, then I'll be second only to the big boss. And I'll have the acclaim that comes from this. And so he's in there with these Noblars, and it is him. And he's actually like relatively aware that Beastgrave is trying to manipulate him, trying to influence him. And so he has almost like, obviously he's not having a back and forth conversation, but he speaks directly to the mountain at times, and that was a fun take to have on this. Yeah, as he works on hunting down this monster, and along the way they also run into Garrick's Reavers, not named, but you can figure out what's going on. There's a guy with a beard. They're Khorne followers, and they die. They definitely Garrick's Reavers inspire in this one.
Yeah,
so.
They got good.
Yeah, they meet their inspiration condition, and it follows that, and he ultimately does not manage to catch this beast. Realizes it's going to be the long haul, but he's not going to let the mountain get the best of him. There were some things I enjoyed, but let me hear your guys' take about this.
My favorite thing about this story was probably the interpersonal relationship of the warband and how Hrothgorn relates to the Noblars and just how they operate, because I guess I wasn't actually completely sure how that would all work. Sure. And getting a little more personalization for Threfnir, although I always kind of figured that Threfnir was going to be like a super loyal sort of creature. Yeah. And finding out that Threfnir is a female, which I thought was like, hey, all right.
Here's what I didn't know about Frost Sabers is that they like create their own
they're just always cold
around them.
Yep.
Yeah, and this is rough on Thrafnir because Thrafnir is constantly like freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing.
It's always wet.
She's just soggy and like unhappy. Bummer.
Yeah, and that's gonna have to
probably doesn't smell great either.
Probably, well, I'm sure an ogre doesn't smell great. And I'm like, man, you're just gonna have to deal with that for eternity because you can't die now and you're stuck in this mountain. But at the same time, while I enjoyed learning more about the warband and how they operate, I felt that the actual story, at least for me, wasn't super compelling. Like, I guess I just didn't think that the hunt gave me enough reason to like care about what he was doing in the mountain. And so I kind of wished that there was a little more going on there, and it led to a lot of action sequence scenes, and it's just kind of like I can appreciate it, but at the same time I'm like, I don't need to read about how he fires his crossbow like 20 times.
But what if he fires his crossbow with a trap in it?
Well, I mean, he does that a few times too. It is cool to think about like Quiv standing on his back, like loading the crossbow automatically, but like the novelty wore off after the first time.
I gotta say I enjoyed Quiv being really good at his job.
Me too.
Yeah, he'd be like bolt, and Quiv would like spring into action, all of a sudden be like really good at this one job. Trap. Loading it. And then one time when he needed a light, he's like torch. Quiv was like sweet and like loads a torch into the crossbow. He's like, no, you idiot.
He's like, what? Torch?
Yeah. Yeah, Quiv was maybe my favorite part of this story.
Quiv was definitely my favorite part too. Yeah.
Oh no, I love the two other Noblars who literally never let go of each other. Yeah, exactly. Like he got hauled up and eaten by the monster. He's still holding onto those legs. He's like, I'm not gonna let go. For just for clarity, so the Forge World Basilisk, as far as I can tell, the original Forge World models actually have red and black stripes on the back of the model
All right,
itself.
there it
And
is.
it has 6 legs and it has a fairly triangular head. So
Okay.
I think that's what he was definitely doing.
That's the kind of investigative journalism that you tune into this podcast for, listeners.
Exactly.
Can't get it anywhere else.
Nope.
No, I really enjoyed this story, mostly because of the Nobblers. But I also enjoyed how the ogre hunter was actually super tactical in his choices and intentional.
Oh yeah,
That
it was fun where he has bushwhacker. He's like, hey, go set up a trap.
Mhm.
The actual trap is like that bushwhacker and the other nobblers are the bait. Yeah.
Yep.
So,
That was good.
Yeah.
Tells him to put it on the ceiling, and he's like, "What? How? Like how?
Yeah.
How am I? What do you want
like,
me to do?"
Just do it. Yeah.
The story was almost irrelevant. That wasn't the
Yeah.
point of this.
Yeah.
The point
Yeah.
was to see them like interact with each other.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing was, I liked that he was a hunter and he was defined by his hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And how he said, when I finish this hunt, I'm going after the heart of the mountain, which I felt was the most direct actual relation to Direchasm in any of the stories.
Sure.
Right. So yeah, I love that Quiv also just like randomly picked up something that glowed, which is his torch.
Yeah.
Like it became super useful, but it was just like
Got
literally
some
like
sweet treasure.
like yeah, exactly. Like they felt like the Nobblers felt like a terrible level 1 adventuring party that were following like a level 15 like like knight. It was pretty fun. So
Did I dream that he at one point shot a trap and then swung from it? Like from
yeah,
You
no,
did.
you did
No,
not. He was
did
Batman,
that.
but an ogre.
Almost didn't make it.
God, this
Yeah.
story was so cool.
Yeah.
And I just loved also, not that I'm a wuss or anything, but this story was also relatively violent, and sometimes on behalf of the Nobblers. Like when they got a chance to really get their licks in, like they did.
Yeah, they were like
yeah.
murderous little children again. Yeah, I
Yeah,
loved it.
exactly.
There was kind of a dark moment where they like because one of the trap uses he yanks one of the reavers all the way across this chasm, and then by the time he managed to turn around, they've like chewed this dude's face off, but he's like clearly still alive because his tongue is still moving. I was like, whoa, like where that is like a discordant note in this like laugh along story here.
Yeah,
I think it was like hey, just remember you're in Beastgrave and it sucks in Beastgrave.
Yeah.
Well,
And
also
Nobblers
remember
are no joke.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like Nobblers are vicious little things. If you are at their mercy, you're in trouble.
Yeah. So that was the Heart of the Beast. Anybody got any last thoughts there? All right, Halls of Gold by Thomas Parrott. This stars the Profiteers, and specifically, this is the first story that actually starts in Shadespire. So the Profiteers, they're a warband that arrived in Nightvault. Their motivation is they have arrived. They went to Shadespire in order to make their fortune, and what they found is here we are in Shadespire, and we can't get out, and we've been stuck here. Thundrick, the boss, specifically says like he can specifically remember dying 8 different times, and it talks about some of this like we're doing this like we're acting as though like the risk of dying exists, but it's because we don't know how else to act. Like we're just gonna keep enduring in the way that Duarden do. And they come upon a basically like a computer game sprite floating in the air. Like every direction they look at is the same. Like they kind of circle around it, and they can see. We know what's going on because we can see through this. And there's this eerie yellow light, and they have to decide like, are we going to risk going through? Like this could be our chance to escape. And they're like, well, it could just straight up kill us. And like, well, we can't actually die. Well, maybe we can if it's this thing. So there's back and forth, and like, if there's a chance to escape, we gotta take it. And so they step on through and end up in Beastgrave. Then they use their Duarden sense of tunnels to actually. This is the first warband I think that sees daylight, right?
Mm-hmm.
They actually get to an opening midway up the mountain, and they're like, oh. there's the outside. But you know what? We're not cursed anymore. We're not in Shadespire. And we are stone cold broke. We got to get something. Like there's no fate worse than being broke. Apparently, if you're a Caradhran overlord.
Yep.
It's like, you know what? We have great direction sense. We know tunnels. Let's turn around and head back. And this is like a horror movie moment, right?
Yep.
Like, because we know like this is the wrong choice. We're like, no, like don't do
Yelling
it.
at the book.
Just walk out of the mountain and find some treasure on your way to Excelsis or something. And instead they go back in and they run into Zarbag's Gits. And this is like a moment of dismay for them because like, we remember these dudes. We fought these guys before, like, and they were back in Shadespire, so that's not great, you know. But maybe it's fine. Like, and they engage in a fight, and it's super brutal. Like, this is a very grisly, violent scene. Like this, the way it's written is pretty graphic.
Yep.
And they, you know, Thundrick is like, oh my gosh, I can't. We could have gotten out, and instead I got my whole crew killed. Both. It's a total wipeout except for Thundrick. And while he's kneeling there, considering the cost of what he's done, all of a sudden from behind him, his crew is like, hey, Captain, are you okay? He's like, oh snap, the curse followed us, and that's kind of the note we end on. So, interesting, different take. What about your take, Phil?
Yeah, I liked this story, but I was just like, you could have gotten out. And I was just like, oh no. But I mean, I figured nobody was getting out because we know they're still in there and still fighting.
Yeah.
I did like how so the mountain has been luring everybody there and like gives them the reason to come deeper into the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And usually that's through like putting visions into their head or some sort of nebulous sense that like, I should probably go into this spooky mountain that everybody says is going to like kill everything.
Yeah.
But for these guys, like they're specifically looking for treasure. They're specifically looking for like aether gold, and all their instruments say that there is aether gold in the mountain, and they even comment about like, well, that doesn't really make any sense. How is there aether gold in the mountain? They're like, well, it's probably somebody's stash. Like, we can explain this away. And it makes me wonder, like, how much power does the mountain really have to affect reality near the mountain? Because they have instruments that are supposed to be able to detect aether gold, and they said that there was aether gold, but we know there probably really wasn't. So,
well, they found some though, right? Like that's what they found a stash that then disappeared. So admittedly, you're suspicious of what is or isn't true. But then, like, didn't one ingot still remain?
It was like
that
this huge pile of treasure, and then after the fight, there's just this one ingot left, and he's like, "Well, wait, what?" And so I don't know. I don't believe it, but it's sort of this questionable thing of like, can we really believe what's going on, because everything that's happening in this mountain seemingly is somewhat nebulous. It's like, is it real? Is it not? Is it shifting?
Sure.
Is it constant?
I think that across a lot of these stories, there have been some examples of like maybe the characterizations have been really great, but maybe the stories have been lacking, but like the characterizations kind of save it. This is maybe one for me that the story I found particularly good, but there wasn't as much characterization of the characters. They all sort of were the classic KO like archetype, which is fine because I enjoyed the plot quite a bit. So you kind of get different stories of different strengths and different weaknesses. And so I really enjoyed where this started, where it went, and where it ended. I thought it was great. And I felt crestfallen as Thundrick did as he realized, what he had done and how his decisions had affected his crew. And then additionally, I thought this is one of the better, maybe even one of the best fights at the end when they're fighting the Gits. It's neat because the Gits are such a varied war band, right? And to some degree, the Profiteers are too. They're equipped in different ways. And so it was neat to see them go head to head and see the, if not creative, like the unique ways that each side deals death, right? Essentially like how, one once, like to see the atomizer in action, or to see the fanatics spinning around, and just sort of how each individual is dangerous in their own ways. And so that was a cool fight to see everybody sort of play to their strengths. So I really liked that part too.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what it specifically was about this fight that was like so made it so brutal. I think, sometimes in the Black Library fiction, the violence that they write is kind of like over the top, or it's like, or it's so over the top that it's abstracted, like, he swung his axe and it went through 3 necks, and each of them sprayed crimson arcs through the air. And this felt like almost, it's hard to say because it's like fantastical things, but almost like a more believable violent, like the injury. I don't know. Like I could picture these things like actually happening. And it felt harder hitting. Like it was, I remember, if not shocked is the word, but being like a little shaken, like reading some of this. And, I guess, hats off to C.L. Werner. Oh, no, not C.L. Werner, Thomas Parrott on that for, because we do play this for escapism, but maybe sometimes it's good to remember that violence is uncool.
I think for me it was how he described the individual injuries on each of the fighters in the KO warband, and how they just kept getting more and more mauled, right? And then he made sure to kind of tie it back to Thundrick watching this happen, right? Because it wasn't even necessarily about the wounds themselves. It was just about how despondent and how he realized how terrible this was. And so when you get to the point where he's like, this was a terrible decision and this was all my fault, you felt like it was your fault a little bit too, like for reading through what happened to him.
I can safely say it was less that for me. I think it was the suddenness of it. Like, like the fight started and people just started dropping like that. Like, Driz gets the back of his head blown out by a shot from One Eye, or Deadeye Lund, and like everyone's just like dropping like that, and it's I guess it's that suddenness and extremity of the violence was like startling when you're used to, like, your heroes are like, they were cut in bleeding from a dozen cuts and could feel something, a broken rib, or, like you're used to that sort of thing where like, they took a lot of hits, but they kept going. And that's because that's always how it goes. These people were just going down.
Well, when neither player takes an objective grabbing deck, it's kind of what happens, right?
Sure.
Like when Drexskewer goes down, he gets shot out of the sky by a magical bolt, and as soon as he hits, he takes out one squig, but the other gets him in his jaws and starts shaking him, and like that's how he ends. Like that's a brutal way to go.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's also something to it where, I don't know, the Caradhran use guns, and like it's it's closer to our reality than like bows and arrows.
Sure.
And I mean the depictions from Deadeye Lund shooting guys, that was a part that I felt like it wasn't necessary to like talk about how after shooting somebody, they like their body kind of still flopped around for a bit after their skull was vacated through their eye. And like,
right.
I don't know. It just, this is, I think, is probably one of the ones that I had commented on earlier, where it was like, things get dark and like kind of comes out of nowhere, and it's almost unnecessarily dark sometimes. So,
sure.
But I mean, it kind of comes with the territory. Like Warhammer is brutal.
Anybody got any more thoughts about this?
I'll just ask David. David, did you played the Profiteers quite a bit, right?
Yep.
Do you feel like you had a certain level of affection towards them, and to see them like mowed down maybe played some part of it as well? Like that, like, like, I don't know, you have an intimate knowledge with, some of these folks. I don't know, that might be part of it too.
Maybe. I think some of it is also like at the time they don't know that they're coming back. I think is also, that maybe feeds more into Paul's point of the, I think it was just like the suddenness and the graphicness, suddenness and how graphic it was. Like was hewed more to a more realistic take that we don't always get here. And I found that to be, if he was shooting, he was shooting to kind of shake us up. I think he was successful. So
Cool.
You have been shook.
I mean, not cool.
yeah. All right. Any more thoughts? Or on to the Root of Death by C.L. Werner. As previously mentioned, the author of the Beastgrave novel. This is following the Wormspat. We get a little nod to why they are the Wormspat, because when they went to seek out Beastgrave, they got swallowed up by a worm and spat out. So like, you know what we are now? The Wormspat. So they are on a mission. They're going to try and seek out the source of the Cataphrane curse. They call it the Unplague, I believe.
Yep.
And specifically, the problem is this Unplague, this thing that is artificially stopping the cycle of death and regrowth. Instead, it's death and rebirth and death. It's infecting Gur with this stagnation of Nagash, basically, and that is like an antagonism we've seen in the past in Age of Sigmar and Warhammer lore. Is Nurgle's all about those cycles, all got to get it in those cycles, and Nagash wants total stagnation, like wants everything to be like a frozen point where everyone's dead and everyone's following him. And so this is another motivation for coming to Beastgrave that makes sense, but is also unique to that particular warband. And so they're trying to seek out the source of this Unplague, which they believe they find. And this is a thing that we've seen. There was a very, very short, not even a short story, like a couple 2 to 3 paragraph thing in the Beastgrave rulebook of who am I thinking of? Cursebreaker, Stormsire's Cursebreakers making their way into Beastgrave and how they came through, and the idea of Shadespire kind of spilling into Beastgrave a little bit. So there's elements of Shadespire that now kind of overlap or exist within Beastgrave, and this is one of those where these shade glass mirrors exist, and this large root of a plant is brushing up against those and crystallizing, and they're theorizing that this is transmitting the curse throughout the mountain, and so they're going to try and take this down. They are fighting. I think the Wild Hunt shows up here. Is that correct?
They do.
Yeah. So at times they're directly fighting against them, but I think at one point they're both actually working against this root. At one point they're kind of back and forth on this. And this is another where the Wild Hunt kind of figure out like that they got to take down Fecula, so they kind of try to focus her down, and that's kind of the core conflict. Anybody got anything they want to share about this one?
I really liked the Wretchling. I thought that was a cool little thingy.
Yeah.
Fecula talked about how she swallowed the Wretchling, and the Wretchling loved it, and then would like wander around in her stomach, and then she would throw her up again. That was fun.
Yeah. And she's like, the next time I do it, I got to file down his horns.
Yep.
Like,
it was painful.
Pretty rough.
Yeah.
Nurgle, you gross. Yeah.
Well, and like, so I was kind of torn here because the characterization I felt like matched exactly what I expected for all the different characters, and I felt like they were done really well. But at the same time, I really don't like Nurgle. And like the characterization of Nurgle is something I don't enjoy. So reading about it wasn't actually all that enjoyable for me, particularly with the Wretchling, because like, well, I liked the idea of this little Wretchling thing. It's like this little weird dog and like swimming around in her stomach. And it's like, oh, that's funny. But it's like she's brewing some sort of plague inside her stomach. And the way she gets it back out is having the Wretchling go get it. And it was like, ugh, that's really gross.
I gotta say, it makes sense that it's called a Wretchling now. Like, I don't know if that was like always canon, but now I'm like, oh yeah, the name means something. Words mean things, Aaron.
Yeah,
that's what I keep saying.
And
so I like that they're I don't know if I'm always just assuming this is the case, but ever since I've read any of the Order of the Fly, I feel like more and more I'm seeing Nurgle sort of represented as this sort of I don't know, medieval sensibilities of like knights and like that type of like language and so on and so forth. And so I don't know if this is following in that tradition or Nurgle is always this way. But anyways, the point being is I'm always delighted when you hear him sort of expressed that way. And despite not being written by Josh Reynolds, who I believe is the progenitor of the Order of the Fly, I hope it continues in that direction and we sort of see that characterization going forward.
Sure. Yeah, I mean they have intentions matter, right? Like they from their perspective they have noble intentions on this, and so that makes them a little more fun to read. Yeah, there was one moment I liked is like Fecula kind of it's almost like this. Well, it is a self-sacrifice thing. Like she goes all out. She's like, we're gonna ignore the wild hunt. She cuts her own belly open to like release these plagues, and then like grabs onto this root and tries to hold onto it and infect this and like counteract this shade glass curse that's going into this root. And it's this kind of selfless sacrifice thing, which is not something that you would typically, associate with a chaos faction, but she does do it, and it seems to work. But then she falls away, and then discovers that she and her warband are in fact also afflicted with this curse, because although she gets up, she's like, well, maybe I didn't actually like get hit hard enough, or maybe I didn't fall hard enough to die. She sees Golgotch, who definitely got skewered like through and through by that big old meanie Skaith. And she's like, okay, well, I guess we're just going to deal with it. And, with the idea that, the followers of Nurgle endure. That's one thing they definitely do. They go on to keep working on it. So
I like how a lot of these stories have like end on like final dramatic like quotes from the main characters. Like the ogre one did too, but she ends with, "We will prevail, and woe betide whatever thinks to interfere with the worm spat." Credits roll.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun. Yeah.
Very dramatic.
Yeah. So any other thoughts on the Root of Death, or should we proceed to the last story in all of this anthology?
I'd rather not.
Yeah, unfortunately. So we have Gaslight, and this is by Anna Stevens. This is back to the Dread Pageants. This is the second time that we've gotten the Dread Pageant as a point of view, and they are specifically working on getting back to Shadespire. And when I say back to, they've not been. This is a warband that started in the Gur version, but they are theorizing, hey, I think we can get from here into Shadespire. And that's critical because Shadespire is in this nether realm in between two other realms, Ulgish, which also happens to be where Slaanesh is imprisoned. And they think there is basically a MacGuffin, for lack of a better characterization, that will help them. It's a powerful Slaaneshi thing that will help them gain fame, glory, and maybe release Slaanesh himself. That's about the summary of that. They're in conflict with some people along the way. I think the interesting things for me was that like it's a two-way street apparently, that you can go back and forth from Shadespire to Beastgrave.
Yeah.
I don't know that we've seen much of that, but that makes sense. That's kind of cool. Shadespire's still there. It's not like it's a ghost town now. But
you've been great, everybody. See you later.
Try the veal.
And I think they encounter the Cataphragms. They encounter some like magic using skeletons. I just felt like at a number, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you will. I think Anna Stevens, she didn't write poorly, but it seemed like she missed some of the background here, where like Vasilak is casting spells and like the Cataphragms are getting directly involved, if that's what we were seeing. There was a bunch of stuff that I was like, I don't know if this is how this is supposed to work, and I don't know if it's because I'm making wrong assumptions, or if the author here just kind of didn't pick up on some of the background. or not. But other thoughts from folks?
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't sure what to make of this one. I think it did an okay job of being like, these are followers of Slaanesh, and this is kind of how they operate.
Yeah.
I don't, and I guess maybe it's okay to not like how chaos people function.
Sure.
But like all the depictions of them like torturing people is just not cool.
Icky. It's icky.
And I was
Yeah.
just like, nah, I don't need, like, let's just skim ahead.
Yeah. It's a fair point. It felt like more of an exploration of like what it meant to be a hedonite of Slaanesh more than what it meant to be like in Beastgrave, maybe.
And
that
I do feel like a lot more so than the first encounter we had with the Dread Pageant, where everything with the first encounter with the Dread Pageant really seemed to be that sort of excess of pain. Whereas this one, they seem to explore a lot more different sort of facets of excess, which I think was good, because I think Slaanesh is complicated in that way and is often written like with one sort of vein as the primary thrust of the story, and then it's like you can kind of lose the track. And I feel like that's happened in the history of Slaanesh a lot, and in some ways has made Slaanesh problematic, but like it really is all encompassing, and it's all these different aspects and all. I mean, it's like the 7 deadly sins kind of thing in one chaos god, even though each one is kind of an embodiment of a few of those different concepts.
Right.
Sorry, sort of unrelated, I guess, but my problem with this story is that very little happened, and we spend way too much time in like the internal monologue of what's her name? Glazette. Yeah, Glazette. And like her internal monologue is all over the place. Like she never really had any sort of central focus. First she was like, all right, well I'm concerned about Slake Slash, but I'm also concerned about I want to stay in the mountain. But in the next breath, or mental breath, she's like, oh, but we also got to get to Shadespire. And it was very scattered, and maybe that's what the brain, the inner thoughts of a hedonite Slaanesh, maybe they're all scattered, but it seemed like we spent so much time jumping between idea and idea and idea that never really went anywhere, that the plot never ended up going anywhere either. And sometimes that's okay. Like some of the stories I was fine with the plot not really going anywhere, the ogre story, but like nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, there's orcs, and like I see one of them, and then we kill him. And there's also a Skaven that was getting dragged around for reasons I don't quite understand. Like, how did that contribute to the story at all?
Magic ritual to get back to Shadespire, I guess.
It did, but it didn't. Yeah, they didn't explain that.
No, they talk about the gaslight. Like, it seems like all this very important thing that like no one explains, which is okay because sometimes things are unexplainable, but no one really seems to focus on. They'd all just sort of take it for granted. No one seems to be curious as to what the deal with the gaslight is. I'd never heard of it. It seems like, again, sort of a tacked on conceit. So I don't know what the story thought it was trying to do, or what she was trying to like get, if there was a central idea she was trying to impart. But I feel like I got lost.
Fair.
Yeah, it almost felt like the end was the goal, which I think is often tough, because it's like if you know you have to end up in a place, that sometimes you can kind of, ideally, the best part of the story is the middle bits, right? Like you don't really have to care about where it starts and where it ends, as long as everything in the middle is good and gives you a like fulfillment of like, I liked how this was told. It felt like this story, the whole point was to get them to a place where they wanted to go out of Direchasm.
Yeah. Which they do, and are surrounded by skeletons.
Yeah.
So
Hundreds of undead, which also makes me wonder, like, okay, so if this story is going to somehow be continued in whatever the next aspect of Underworlds is, like, we're not going back to Shadespire, are we? Like that, that feels impossible. Like,
let's call it Shadespire. Two additional complaints that I want to get in real quick. In that, like, what were the deal with the beetles? Like, how did that contribute to the story? Like, at all?
Yeah.
That seemed completely out of place. And the idea that she was so suspicious of the Slangor seemed so very much like it was a tell not show situation, where she kept talking about how she didn't trust him, but I never saw any reason for her to doubt him in the first place. And so like that also threw me for a loop. All right, I'm done. Tagging.
All right.
So,
Fair enough.
Conspiracy theory. What if we're going to go to Ulfenkarn next season? And that's
That
why we
does
have
sound
so
like
many
a Paul theory.
skeletons.
Hashtag Paul theory.
That
Number 2.
wouldn't be. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that would
could
be
see it.
really interesting. I could see that for sure. But number 2, this is the first story where we are rehashing, reintroducing a warband that's already been used, right? Because in the first story, we already had the Dread Pageant. I understand they weren't quite as like specifically drawn out and delineated as far as the different members of the warband, but to have this as a story defining them at the end, I could see how in a certain sense it would be kind of like starting at the point where you end, but at the same time it's also like, well, we've already talked about them. And there's so many other warbands that you might have like, you know, delved into a little bit more, that it might be hard to parse the two separately instead of comparing the two directly. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, like again, if we were to, so this kind of gets into my point of, I think the way that the stories were set may have affected the way that we read the stories, right? I think The Mountain's Call was a really good first story. But I think it could have been put anywhere in the anthology, and it still would have been a really good story. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And you could have started with the Profiteers. You could have started with, the Jabberslave's Grin, right? Like you could have started with any of these other stories where they start outside of Beastgrave and enter in. And I think those would have been some nice entrances. So, for example, if the Jabberslave's Grin would have been the first story, that would have been a really fun kind of like entrance into Beastgrave. But when it was the 5th or 6th story, right, it's kind of a rehash of things that you've already done. And I think that did not help the strength of that story very much, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, so we're kind of looking at like bigger things of the book as a whole, which is a fine thing to be switching on to. And you're talking about this sequencing thing. Like I haven't really thought about it until we talked about it here, but like when you have an anthology of short stories, like it's got to be like sequencing an album. Like, all right, like I've got something up tempo. Okay, now I've got a real downer. Like how many up tempo in a row can I go?
Yes.
How do I like change the pace without really grinding the gears? Like I think that's got to be fairly challenging for someone to do. There's got to be a particular skill to that.
Yeah. I think
and whereas like writing an album, you may have, you know, I don't know, like you might be doing say in this case, like an album with 11 tracks, you might have, you know, 18 tracks recorded. Which ones are we actually going to use? I imagine they've got more. There were probably some submissions that they didn't quite use, but I don't know if they had the flexibility to say like this one, not this one, and all that sort of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think like if you're to take Claws of Famine, then Chains of Fate, right? Then The Rage of the Mountain and Heart of the Beast, those could have been put anywhere. And I think they all would have been very successful for what they were.
Yeah, I don't know that you put those lighthearted ones at the very first one. I think those are good, like breather stories. I don't think when you say put them anywhere, I don't think you put them at the beginning. I don't think you put them at the finish. I think they're good interspersed in there to like kind of relieve some tension.
Yeah. But I think had we started with a different story, then it would have, I think, allowed us to enjoy, like I would have enjoyed The Mountain's Call a little bit later, I think, as well as in the beginning. It was a great intro, but because it deals with two war bands and it's such a well characterized story, it could have stood its own at any point. And I think that might have actually, like, you know, had we gotten, for example, The Gaslight as the first story, perhaps that would have been a really interesting introduction, because it would have attempted to get the characters back to where they started, as opposed to the ending where I feel like all the warbands have now realized where they are and what's going on. And you're like, oh yes, another warband that's trying to get back to Shadespire, right? Like the Eyes of the Nine story, or etc. So I don't know. That's just kind of a thought from me.
Well, Paul's kind of advanced us onto some overall things. How about we're going to field a few questions here and then some of our general questions and wrap it up because we've been going for a long time.
Yeah, not that long.
Well, long enough. We had a couple listener questions. Dear friend of the show, Severe, wanted
and also
to know,
patron of the network.
Patron, yeah, and thank you for that. Says we've gotten a few lost civilizations in the background of Underworlds, specifically the Cataphragms and the Silent People stand out. Do you think these could be expanded upon in wider Age of Sigmar lore, or are they something unique to the Underworlds? Aaron, I'm going to throw this to you as the usual helmsman of the story phase.
I think, could they be expanded upon? Yeah, definitely. Anything could. Will they be expanded upon? I get a sense of a trend with GW that they compartmentalize on average. So for the most part, they'll I would imagine they might keep these separate because they have so many ideas filling their little GW brains that like they'd be more inclined to go in new directions than they would to like call back to these. I mean, there'll always be like lines in like battle tomes, or there'll always be references, but I doubt we'll ever see them expanded upon in the AOS proper, which brings me no pleasure to say because I wish they would, but I wouldn't put money on it.
Yeah, I mean, so there's this thing where they have always done in their fiction where they leave these hooks, right? Mm-hmm. Like here's a hook for you to latch onto, and if you want to create a whole army based on this little open-ended story hook, then you're all open for that, or you're all, you can do that. But I think sometimes they even leave them open for themselves, and it's possible that they're doing something like that here. Like, here's a cool thing, and if we decide that we really think it's cool, well, we'll lean into it later. So I think when they create these hooks, they can create them for us as interesting story points, but they can create them for themselves to give themselves some options going forward. We didn't talk a lot about the Silent People because honestly, they didn't pop up all that much in here. There were some references, and maybe Aaron and Paul, having not played as much of the game, didn't pick up on them as much. There'd be like these statues, these some of the stories would be these partially formed things. They looked kind of insectoid, and like there were speculation like maybe these aren't actually statues. Like the Silent People were their pupation got interrupted by the introduction of the Cataphragm curse. They have this long life cycle, and it's been disrupted by the arrival of this, and what the impact of that is yet to be determined. But that's about it. Like, we've seen some of the relics, and just in reference, I would say we know more about the Silent People from the cards in the game itself than we do from any of these short stories.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that in the AOS 3.0 core book, they've actually brought back some earlier callbacks. So the Floating Market of Batar, which is an army that Steve Foote made based on one sentence, now is actually being referenced as a major player in Akshi. And in addition to that, they're talking about the remnants of the Aglaraxi Empire, which is something that was in one of the campaign supplements in AOS 1.0. But they're not talking about the Aglaraxi themselves. They're talking about kind of an outgrowth, an evil splinter group from the Aglaraxi. So
bring it home for us. You're way out there. Tie it back in. You can do this.
Yeah. So there is the possibility that they might go back and draw in some Cataphragm influences or some Silent People influences. But it seems a little bit of a forlorn hope, unless we're to see something that really makes those be thrust into the spotlight. And with Beastgrave being not on Fondia, we're going to really have to see the plot go widely abroad in order for them to start being included into the main narrative of AOS. And with the Cataphragms being completely wiped out and in Shyish, and we've already went to Shyish, and nothing produced from that, that seems like an even farther call out that that's going to be something that will end up influencing the future. So they definitely could be expanded upon, but I don't think that they're going to be anything that is, and I think they will continue to be unique to Underworlds.
I mean, this feels like they like to have the distant past kind of peoples to just
Yep.
be there and sort of be static. I mean, they even just introduced 2 new ones with the Draconith and the Drogruk.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they like to have that sort of grounding history that's sort of in the dead past, where it's like we don't have to actually worry about it, but it's, hey, it's this thing and it's there and it's grounding the universe. Where I would actually like to see them pick up more of their story hooks from Underworlds is where they have like groups in Underworlds that don't really fit into any of the existing factions in AOS,
Mm-hmm.
particularly Kurnothi, but also some of the greenskins. And it's like, well, how do you sort of explain where these guys came from and where they fit in? Because they're not anywhere else, but obviously they must be part of one of these larger groups. So
yeah, I mean, and that is a fair point, especially in this crossover episode, because people often look at these Warhammer Underworlds warbands and see that, okay, maybe this is a faction that's coming, and often that's actually the case. Like we see Molag, and then more new Trogoths show up, and we see I don't know, like the Slaanesh or the Soulblight. Like we see these different warbands show up and they're followed by something, but then sometimes we don't. We see Wolf Riders, or we see the Godsworn Hunt, or the Kurnothi, and they don't develop into anything. So, we're ranging kind of far from the original question, but it's not impossible. I think we're saying that it probably won't happen, but in my mind, I think they're leaving it open. They're giving themselves an out if they want to. But we have one more listener question. This is from the one and only Confusion Card, asking the only question he could ask, which is, how is the Confusion Card integrated into the plot of the book? And I have to assume, because his avatar is the Confusion Card from Beastgrave, that he's speaking about that one specifically. That is a card that has one of Skaith's Wild Hunt looking through some amber at a very shocked Ungor. And I mean, that's kind of that nightmare vibe of like, there's bad guys, they're just on the other side of the glass, they're right there. How do I get to them? Can they get to me? And the quote on that one is, the cursed caverns within Beastgrave can disorient even the most keen-minded explorer. And that is definitely a theme that I would say runs through this book. Like,
absolutely.
Everybody's always disoriented, like, or, even if they think they know where they're going, they probably don't. Things close up behind them or don't, and they just get lost. And there's a very claustrophobic sense. And, that card, I know this is a joke question, but that's the kind of sense the card gives you. And that's the sense we get from this book. But to the greater sense of themes, what, anyone want to comment on like any unifying themes or subjects that we saw throughout this book after reviewing it in full here?
It was definitely mentioned sort of throughout, but hunger was always something that was coming up. And it seems to have been being driven by the mountain itself. But it explains the hunger mechanic in the game, and sort of why you would make. Now, of course, it's probably backwards. It's probably actually that they wrote the story that way because they were like, hey, we've got this thing. We need to integrate it into the story. Yeah. But I like that it gives it a in-realm reason for having that be a new mechanic in Direchasm.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely got a hunter-quarry kind of perspective from some of the warbands as well.
Sure.
So I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Pursuit is often happening in here. So, and I think just we see the connection between Shadespire and Beastgrave, like this idea of like sort of labyrinthine place of no escape. You know, it's nightmarish even before you introduce the Catafrane curse and reality kind of phrase, and it's difficult to, you know, maintain your sense of self when you're in there. So I definitely, by the end of this, I was like, okay, I've read enough claustrophobic stories. I'm ready for something else. So
wide open
I
spaces.
enjoyed it. So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the other things is that the whole idea of the constant death and the constant rebirth, which is something that's been in Shadespire and it's been in Beastgrave, is something that was very much emphasized within the stories, right? Because that's part of the setting. But it was also a really interesting way to see it affect the different warbands in different ways. And I think that was something that this anthology was very successful at. Was you would read one short story and be like, this is how they deal with the rebirth. Got it. And you read another short story and be like, oh, this is an absolute failure for them. And you read another short story and you're like, whatever, I just waited 5 days. It's fine. We're all fine now. Everybody's fine now. So I thought they did a really good job of actually embodying those different perspectives for the rebirth and death.
So we've hit some of our listener questions. Let's hit some of our universal questions here. These are questions we often ask. This is a quick one. We've kind of touched on this. What did we learn about the Mortal Realms that we didn't know before? Aaron, do you feel like there's anything you came with that you didn't know before?
Yeah. Trying to pinpoint. What it's maybe not about the Mortal Realms specifically, but just generally the wide-ranging ways that the mountain could lure individuals to it. Like it's not so much a universal like fact or knowledge, but just the uniqueness, the unique ways that one might be lured to a mountain is really what stood out to me. And then in doing so, highlighting the primal intelligence that is baked into these mountains that we always knew were sort of like carnivorous, or, you know, in a very loose sense of the word, in Gur. And then extrapolating that to Gur at large. So I'm going from step by step to sort of expanding the scope. In that I feel like we've read a lot about the beasts themselves in Gur, but now we're really getting to the heart of what it means to, I don't know, even be a geographical landmark in Gur as well.
Sure.
So I feel like that was enlightening to me.
Fair. I'm going to run down. Give me your favorite story. We're going to go in the order that we introduced ourselves. So, Paul, your favorite story of the 11, which was it?
I would have to say that it was The Rage of the Mountain. It was just so simple, so quick. It's got a bunch of grots, which I love. So yeah, no, I loved it.
This is Rippa and the Snarlfangs. Yeah,
correct.
All right. Then that is on to Aaron.
I think,
what was your favorite story?
Claws of Famine, which might be most, or a few others answers as well, because it was such a uniquely told story. There was a great, I don't know, twist is the word, but sort of it was a real thinker while also being, you know, a fairly action packed story as well. And it was the first one that really, I felt like, put me in the unique and like weird and confusing place for both the setting of the mountain, but then also into the mind of a ghoul of the Flesh Eater Courts. Really, it was doing so much in such a short span. It really did a lot of work, and because of that, I loved it.
What you go to short stories for? Phil, favorite?
Also, Claws of Famine. I wouldn't have thought that I'd be able to sympathize with and empathize for a ghoul, but coming out of the story, I definitely do.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that like humanizing the ghouls is actually like really impressive part of just such a short story. And like, I don't know, it's just very engaging and like thought-provoking story, I feel like. And I mean, they've always been a faction that I found fascinating anyway, but like I feel like this really took it to a whole nother level.
Yeah, a faction where I don't care for the models and I love the background.
I know, right?
It puts them in a real weird spot for me. For me, I mean, I am leaning heavily towards Claws of Famine, but I might go Chains of Fate just because of the unexpected. Like it was such a surprise to, I was like, oh, Eyes of the Nine. I didn't think I was going to get a story from there. Like, oh man, like Kacharik is the point of view, like wild, and just the fact that it's clear that the author had kind of done some looking into the warband, and that was very enjoyable for me. And yeah, just it was a fun little bit of reading, and it was nice to have that 1-2 punch coming right after Claws of Famine. Is where this anthology really started rolling for me. So
this is my second favorite. I'm right there with you.
Sure. One thing we like to ask is, who's your dude, and this is who's your gender neutral dude? Who is the person that you enjoyed reading or identified with, or whatever the case may be? And we're going to go in the order that these notes exist. So, Aaron, who's your
I'm
dude?
glad I'm going first, because I would put money on me not being the only person to select this charismatic, important, impactful character.
I know where you're going,
but I don't know. It's Quiv is my dude. He's just, I mean, Noblars shouldn't be good at their jobs, but this guy is. He transcends his I don't know, his lot in life, and he's good at what he does, and what he does is slot bolts and traps into Hrothgorn's crossbow, and it seems like maybe a cop out is like a silly answer, but no, I felt like I learned something about him. I know more about him and maybe Noblars as a whole coming out the backside of that story, and it was something that I didn't realize there was a hole in my knowledge, and I'm glad that I have filled it.
Sure. All right, Phil, who's your guy?
Yeah. It's tough. I definitely, I really enjoyed Ripa. I thought that they did a really good job with him, and I definitely really enjoyed reading his story and a lot of his perspective. But I think my favorite character, which is a little odd because they didn't have a name, but was just the nameless hunter from the first story, and like getting a very normal person's perspective on a very not normal, like fantastical situation. Like, this person doesn't even really know that magic is like really possible. They're like, yeah, I know, like there's the stories and stuff from our tribe, but like that's just myths and legends, and then gets thrown into this world of just basically high fantasy Age of Sigmar, and is like, just has to deal with this. And I feel like it allows us as the reader to sort of get pulled along into this story. And the character we're brought through with is basically at the same level we are.
Fair. Good choice. Paul.
I'm going to go with Thwack and Luggett. I'm going to read a paragraph because I really enjoyed it. Threaten and rock, Thwack said, and Luggett echoed him. Do stones scare? Like, I love how stupid and little they are, but yet they provide such a wonderful foil for Hrothgorn, right? Like,
yeah.
They question him.
Are you talking to the mountain again?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
it's literally like, okay, you're the boss, but like, you're talking to some freaking rock, buddy. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. Wow. Nice. Should I pick Bushwhacker so we just get all the Noblars?
I mean, hey, I'm cool with it.
No, I had Quiv in my sights, and I served that up to I knew I knew Aaron was gonna jump on that. So, I think I'm gonna go with Duke Crackmarrow here.
Ooh, also good,
specifically because of that interaction where, like, I'm sure what they were actually doing was pretty gnarly. Like, when he is handing out rations, and when he's, letting Valerie drink from his blood and all that sort of thing. But the thing is, like, how are they understanding it? Like, they didn't just leave her to die. They found her. It was hard to find her. Like, they tracked her down, even when she was like seeing through her delusions and running away. Like, they spent the energy to get her and bring her back into the fold. And it felt benevolent, and I thought that was interesting. And he felt like the noble leader that he thinks that he is. And however it looks from the outside, like I think I said earlier, intentions matter, and like he had good intentions here, and like that was kind of cool. So I'll go with the Duke.
He was great because
yeah.
Just gonna say just that it. Oh god, that's the truth. That like sure they did a lot of monstrous things, but the kind things that he did were kind no matter what, or like generous no matter what. Whether he's a regular duke or a weird ghoul, he still let her drink out of him. Like it's good no matter how you look at it. So that you're right. He was a good character.
Yeah, I totally thought you were gonna pick Kacherik, Davy, and I was leaving Kacherik for you to pick.
I thought about it hard. I would say Kacherik was like the one I could identify with. I had a whole thing about like, being so sure that you knew the best and better, and then like when it all comes down to the wire, having your comeuppance, and you're like, oh, I wasn't quite as smart as I thought I was. Like, I can identify with that moment, but I at the last minute I bucked away from that.
Fair.
I was almost there, and I appreciate you serving that up, Paul. All right. I think that about wraps it up for us. Does anybody have any last thoughts about this before we close it out?
I did enjoy Beastgrave. I would recommend reading that for kind of a cool introduction into Gur, and also because Match Play right now is set in Gur. It's a very appropriate time to read the lore of Gur, and this is the most Gurian book that we have at the moment. So
sure. I forgot we usually give ratings, so hit me with a rating there, Paul.
I'm gonna go with 7 of 8 spider legs. I rather enjoyed it. It was a fun read for me, for sure.
All right. Aaron, hit me with a rating.
I did most of my reviewing up at the top, and I guess I didn't really need spoilers to say any more about it. And then, like, I genuinely enjoyed it. Short stories are the best format for Black Library fiction, and so this was a great read, and I recommend it. I will give it 9 out of 11 short stories because I liked 9 out of 11 of them. And so that seemed fitting as far as the rating goes.
Okay, Phil, over to you.
Yeah, would recommend. I definitely enjoyed overall all the stories combined. I really enjoyed the anthology. Like, there's some that I would probably not rate, but but yeah, as a whole, it's great. I have not read Beastgrave, but now I'm curious to see more about the different warbands. Shadespire is great, but it doesn't necessarily like it's not the same. Like, it's more of an exploration of the setting rather than the people in the setting, I guess. So it's like it's a different animal, but Shadespire was great. So I'm guessing
you talking the Mirrored City?
Yeah,
totally.
So I'm guessing that maybe Beastgrave is probably in the same vein. So yeah, these all seem good. Looking forward to what they do for the next one.
Sure. I really enjoyed it. It's the fastest I've whipped through a Black Library offering in quite a while. And honestly, like, we weren't sure we were going to be able to get this. I wasn't sure we were going to be able to get this together. And everybody worked their way through pretty quick. My rating would be, because I'm in the same vein as Aaron, where I think Black Library is at its best in the short stories. And I would like the chance to do more anthology coverage in the future. I should say, if you are into short stories and such, Aaron and I, and sometimes some guests occasionally cover those in the Pocket Realms, which start out on the Patreon only, and then a little later get released to everybody at large, where we'll cover some of those, and we may have some of those coming back up in the fall here. But yeah, my take on it is, we'll say 33 out of 36 war bands currently fighting in Direchasm
Nice.
is
like it.
Is what I'll give it. Pretty high rating. Couple slower moments, but very happy I read it overall. Yeah, that's our review. Any last thoughts before we close it out?
So this is a very petty and small one, but I went to Cave of the Mounds today with my son, and I was disappointed that every story had stalactites and stalagmites in it when it's in a mountain that moves constantly, where they would be falling off and breaking constantly.
A wizard did it,
So
Paul.
after going to Cave of the Mounds this morning, I was just like, oh, I'm kind of annoyed that every place is like this beautiful, fantastic stalactites, stalagmites. That was all. So.
Fair enough. They're leaning into the idea of those as teeth, I think, here, but fair enough. For us, let's see. If you want to get in touch with us, you can get in touch with the What the Hex side at WTHcast or whatthehexcast@gmail.com. Aaron, where can they get in touch with you and or the Story Phase?
Sure. Well, you can find the Story Phase at the Story Phase is the Mortal Realms podcast. Basically, you find it anywhere podcast can be found. You can find me on Twitter at Dosasos, and find the rest of the Mortal Realms content at www.themortalrealms.com.
Yes, Paul, where can people get in touch with you?
They can find me at PJ Shard.
And Phil, where can people get in touch with you?
Well, for the most part, on our Discord, it would be the only real possible spot. I guess you just call me out in a comment or anywhere that you see our podcasts get posted.
You just call out his name.
Just scream.
And you know wherever he is.
But
yeah.
Yeah. You should do that. You should join our Discord. We try to have a welcoming, inclusive community there. There's some great conversations going on about all manner of things. If you want to rep us, you can get some apparel. There's a link on the mortalrealms.com with our shirts and all that sort of thing. There is some talk. We'll see what it comes to of season 4 of Dogs of Warcry coming together. Hopefully those guys will do so.
Well, since you said it, now they have to.
Oh, okay.
You know what? We've been saying it on What the Hex for a little while. But now it's this crossover, so they are really stuck with it. Coming up for the What the Hex, we're not going to make any promises. We're recording this pretty far in advance, so we're going to keep our options open. I'm not saying for the Story Phases, might even be further in advance for them if you're hearing this on the Story Phase feed. One thing we like to do on What the Hex is provide a recommended listening, and for that it's going to be The Mountain by Steve Earle, and that's off the album of the same name. Gentlemen, any last comments before we sign out?
No, but good idea. What is this, a crossover episode?
Yeah. For What the Hex and the Story Phase, I've been Davy.
This is Phil.
This is Aaron.
Paul?
All right. So then I'll run through this, and then I'm just going to take it and run with the. After that, I'll run with the usual What the Hex segments, and then we'll kind of transition. We'll head to the Story Phase, and we'll have Paul do his readings. So
cool.
And then we'll get into it. Everybody good?
Mm-hmm.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Mortal Realms, an Age of Sigmar Story Phase. Oh boy. Welcome.
It's not easy. Who writes the rules? Who's
Did that happen last time? We had to do a lot more stalling before we started last time.
If we stall any longer, I'm going to have to go get another drink. So,
I give that comment a thumbs up. Okay.
And there's also...
I'm now of the opinion.
There's also a short story... Oh, sorry.
Oh, go on.
There's a short story in White Dwarf as well that...
Can I get another take of that where you purposely mispronounce all of those, like get the wrong emphasis, like Eyes of the Nine, Rapaz, Snarl, Fangs?
I totally do that.
Miarais, Purifiers, the
Perfect.
Dryad Pageant.
That's the gold we're looking for.
Morguiath's Bloody Covine. Splight claws
Nope,
swarm.
this is a train wreck. Never mind.
You asked.
All right.